pretty similar to our meeting objectives for the last couple of meetings. We're going to try and finish up discussion of the various recommendations that we've been talking about the last couple of meetings, and learn about and discuss water management strategies. John's got a good agenda for us for today. Just a couple of quick administrative notes. If you need the restrooms, they're through these double doors over here. We do have some water bottles in the corner if anybody gets thirsty. If you get a minute after the meeting to check out the rest of the interpretive center, there are some pretty neat exhibits just talking about the history of the Santee Canal and kind of the predecessor to our lakes, if you look back far enough. So it's pretty interesting setup we have here. Encourage you to take the time to check that out if you can. But wanted to ask for a motion for approval of the agenda that John distributed last week.
Motion.
Second.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks. John also sent out minutes and a summary of our June meeting in that same email last week. Motion to approve those documents.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any opposed to that? Okay, awesome. Thank you. I believe that's about all I've got. We turn it over to John.
All right, and Megan, it is recording, right?
It is.
Okay.
Did you want to talk about the water SC meeting or?
We
We
good
can talk
timing.
about that later.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just one of the newsworthy items, yeah.
Sorry.
On June 12th, there was a Water SC meeting. There's not one this month, but there will be a retreat in August, I think. But at the June meeting, there was a River Basin Council panel discussion. So Alicia and Michael were both there. At least every council had 2 RBC members there, usually a chair or vice chair, sometimes just a member. They generally talked about key takeaways from the water planning process, challenges, successes, and then thoughts on visions for moving forward after this first planning stage. But I'd love to hear your impression, what you guys thought about it. If you think it was useful, you think it was going to be useful to help shape the direction of the state water plan, future planning efforts, anything you want to add to the RBC discussion?
It was good to meet other people involved in the planning process. I thought that was a positive takeaway. I don't know how much value it provided to the Water SC members who are trying to accomplish some pretty major goals in a short amount of time. And so I hope we didn't tie up time that they might otherwise have had for discussion. But yeah, I mean, overall, it was good to meet other people and to hear a little bit about some of the challenges other councils have faced. I don't know if you had any other takeaways, Alicia.
I think it was effective at getting some points across that maybe they had not considered, or from our perspective. And there were things that most of the people had in common, and then there were some differences that, different situations that different river basins had come across. So I thought it was pretty worthwhile. It didn't take that much time, that part of the meeting. So, and they seemed interested. I mean, they were asking questions and everything. So, and then we helped them in an exercise afterwards on working through some of the things, sort of like what we do with our buckets. And so we were able to give some input in their little breakout sessions too. So yeah, I'm glad we did it. I didn't think it was a waste of time or anything.
No. Yeah, for sure. Hopefully the retreat in August is helpful.
Joe, anything you want to add about what else?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the discussion was great, very worthwhile. It was good to get those 2 groups together and hear the RBC perspective and what Water SC's, mission is. And I think the retreat, they'll take a lot of the information they heard during that meeting and discuss it further.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was very productive.
Good. Okay. The other thing that's happened since our last meeting, good number you were able to attend Jason's webinar on statistics. Dr. Thompson gave us a nice overview of statistics, and we're going to continue that discussion today. If you didn't get a chance to see it, I think Alexis, who's online, I think you've posted it, correct, to the website?
Yes, I did. I think so.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So if you haven't had a chance to see it, you still want to review it, it is available on the website. Any other RBC member newsworthy items you want to bring up? We'll talk about one that Tony just showed me a minute ago when we get to our discussion of water management strategies, because it's kind of pertinent to that. But he noted that Google just put out an RFI, a funding opportunity for any organization basically that manages water. It includes councils like ours, municipalities, governments. They're doing something that looks like nationwide to help minimize their water use. So they're funding water efficiency projects. And he just showed it to me before the meeting. I haven't read it yet, but to me, it seems very similar to something that Coca-Cola's been doing for a while globally. Their aim is to replenish the same amount of water through funding projects in all the areas where they use water for bottling and making beverages. So they want to replenish the same amount that they withdraw. And it looks like that's kind of what Google is going towards. So we'll try to learn more about that. Tony's forwarded me that RFI. Does anybody else know about that or see that?
No, but, sorry, I had have a high school friend who's in the, TV news media in the upstate. And she said she had a reporter that wanted to do a story on, how much water data centers are using. And so the reporter contacted me and I forwarded her to, find Clay Duffy Mount Pleasant, because he's like the guru of, at least from the water utilities perspective on how much water they've used. So, I thought that was interesting.
All right, we'll talk more about that when we get to the water management strategy discussion. Megan, just remind me, what RBC members do we have online right now?
Let me just check, because there's a lot. Just looking through.
What's up, Brandon?
We have John Grego online, Jeff Rubles joined online, Brandon Stutz, Alan, those are all the members online.
Okay. All right. Okay, public and agency comment. Any agency comment or members of the public that are attending online like to make comment? Catherine, do you want to introduce your new watershed coordinator?
Sure. We have Amelia here, so we have the Edisonville watershed, and then Shay is the other surveillance for that. So they're just going to see scale on there.
Yep, so officer resilience, new staff. Yep. Thanks. Okay, let's do a quick recap of what we talked about in June. We focused on two types of recommendations, planning process recommendations, and we quickly settled on these 4 planning process recommendations, which we're going to include in Chapter 9 of our plan. And then we spent most of our time continuing our discussion of policy, regulatory, legislative recommendations. At the May meeting, we had started that discussion and we came to consensus on a handful of recommendations. These 5 are the ones that we came to consensus on. So we put in that green bucket at the last meeting. We yellow bucketed a bunch of recommendations that we're going to, again, talk about today. But these are the 5 that we all agreed to by consensus. Questions about those? That refreshing your memory, I hope. Which brings us to our first discussion item is let's try to continue and hopefully finish our discussion of the policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations. And if you recall, Jason left with a little bit of homework, as did Alan. We had some good debate and discussion around a number of recommendations that had to do with statistics and how they're used in regulation and legislation pertaining to safe yield, minimum stream flows. Riley, I think you were going to do a little bit of homework maybe on one of the recommendations that we started to debate.
Yeah.
Okay, and I apologize, I might have missed the email, but when we get to that, we'll make sure we talk about it. So we're going to start it off with a handful of proposed recommendations that Jason has offered up for consideration. Jason's recommendations kind of cover three different issues. And Jason, I'll let you kind of explain those three issues before we dive into your list of proposed recommendations for consideration.
Sure, thanks. Thanks to everybody that humored me with the presentation in between the two River Basin councils, or that were able to watch it later on. Really appreciate you taking your time and being given the time to present. So, I mean, obviously, whether you're talking to Water SC or whether you're talking to one of the 8 River Basin councils, there's a variety of issues, and depending upon who you ask, which stakeholder group, will be what issues are most pertinent, and then how you fix them might change depending upon which user group you're asking. But, you know, some common threads are that there are disincentives for new withdrawers to get permits even when resources are plentiful, and that is the case in some cases. There's an overestimation, in my opinion, of water availability, specifically safe yield calculation, which I covered in the presentation, that may lead to stream flows below MIF and potentially future shortages across the entire state because of the reasons I explained in that presentation. And then there's unequal application of the surface and groundwater laws and regulations. You know, Alan kind of talked about some of his concerns between surface and ground, and we'll talk about that today. But then, you know, no shortage of debate around, you know, registrations versus permits versus new permits, you know, old and grandfathered versus new permits. And so it's just three potential topics that we kind of ended our discussion last on. And then I was asked to come up with some recommendations for us to shoot apart today. And so that's what I've done.
All right. So let's talk about the first one that Jason proposed for consideration. I'll let you explain it, I guess. Y'all should read it.
It looks worse than it is, I promise. But if you watch the presentation, or we're attending the presentation, hopefully this will make even more sense. But if it doesn't, let's talk about it. So for the safe yield definition should be updated using median statistics, 80% median rather than 80% mean or average, and recognition that median statistics more accurately characterize typical water availability and stream flows that are non-normally distributed. 80% median is available about 60% of the time. That's a fact in the data across all 8 basins. And it is a safe yield compared to the current 80% mean, which has about a 40% availability across the basins in the state, and is a compromise in recognition that permittees may not utilize their entire permit allocation. I know there's got to be questions and discussions, so.
This is very similar, not necessarily identical, but very similar and identical in concept to a recommendation that the Edisto considered and approved, not by consensus, but by a majority. In fact, it was a pretty strong majority, I believe, wasn't it, Jason? I think there's only
That's what I thought myself.
1 or 2 holdouts that just felt that really wasn't necessary to change anything right now. They understood the concept, made sense, but they didn't want to put forth any recommendations that changed regulation or legislation. That's really, I think, the only other council that thoroughly considered this. It came up in some other councils, but without a sponsor there to really talk about it, it never gained a whole lot of traction. Not that they wouldn't have considered it, you know, really debated it and maybe approved it. It just didn't come up. They were talking about other recommendations. That's kind of the history of how it's been discussed in other councils. So what do y'all think? You've heard hopefully Jason's presentation on the statistics side. We began to talk about it a little bit at the last meeting. This is Jason's proposed recommendation. Thoughts?
Go with it.
Todd likes it.
So,
So
good job, Dave.
Thank you.
So the people that would disagree with this would be maybe people who were concerned that large users, industrial users would not be allowed into the community of water because of concern for shortage. Who's not going to want to agree with something that's more accurate?
So and this is probably more of a Joe question because it's pertinent to more of those conversations, but at the end of the day, there's nothing stopping even now, in most cases, new permittees from coming, and even frankly, agriculture from coming in through permits to get a permit. But depending upon if they're new, and we'll get to it, if especially when those requests are above state yield, there should be contingency required. And so it really, a lot of the folks that are against unifying grandfathered and new permits or changing the definition don't want a contingency requirement. And what we tend to say is that there, in some cases, should be a contingency requirement, especially as you're approaching safe yield. And then too, I think of concern beyond even some number, whether it be 80% median or 80% mean, is there is some push because of, I believe, the lack of understanding of allocation law and all these differences in user groups to de-emphasize safe yield altogether. In other words, let's just hand out, let's allow the handing out of new allocation, and then whoever uses it first gets it first, and whoever's later on gets less available water, and you increasingly split the resource over more and more users, and they'll figure it out when that happens. They should have had more contingency. But I would say that even though I don't know that the modeling is going to show shortages in our basin, why is it applicable to our basin? Maybe it's a little less contentious for our basin for that reason. So we could actually talk about it and vote for it. But the whole point of not over allocating the resource is so that we don't run out for the withdrawers, whoever they be, permits and registrations. But then too, the most important thing to our basin and keeping Lake Marion and Moultrie full is that we're not overutilizing the rain that hits our soil in our basin, but that also the three major upstream basins have some water left over. And if you over allocate resources across the state, you will increasingly have diminished outputs from the major basins. And the whole point of not over allocating is that you have enough water for the last user in a basin.
If doesn't it all trickle down to us?
It does.
So if they run out, oops, that would not.
Wouldn't be good for them. It wouldn't be good for the environment between them and us, and it certainly wouldn't be good for us. And in theory, the very last user in a basin should have water, and they should have enough water such that they can leave some left over for the environment, such that both withdrawers and non-withdrawers are being protected.
Yeah, we have no choice but to have enough left over for the environment, or we get in pretty significant trouble as a hydro operator.
At the end of the day, if Lake Marion, Moultrie are overutilized and or not getting enough inputs into them, then the Santee environmental releases start to be threatened, and the contracted releases to the Pannapolis Cooper River Basin start to be compromised. And that would be bad for everybody.
Online, John had said it's an improvement and it's still quite conservative since safe yield will be unavailable 40% of the time. So I don't think we're proposing anything radical. So.
Yeah, I think any move towards modeling and decision-making that better reflects what we actually see in the physical world is a positive move. And it's a step in the right direction from that perspective.
I guess why are we, all of our other recommendations are fairly broad, and we deliberately tried not to get as specific in terms of exactly language that could be in statute or regulation. So why for this one are we being so precise? Because I think obviously the safe yield rules and definition needs to be looked at, but I don't know if this completely solves it. Well, it is a positive step forward going, utilizing the median, since the mean, it's not going to completely solve the problem. So I'm wondering if we just say it needs to, safe yield needs to be updated with, the best available science and follow, the best available data and science out there, rather than being so specific.
Just a little bit of background. That discussion's come up in other basins. In the Saluda Basin, we had more than twice the number of RBC members, almost 30. So there was a lot of difficulty in coming to consensus when the recommendations got pretty specific, like this one. And because of that, we kind of backed away, and they did agree on just a more general recommendation saying, let's relook at the definition of safe yield. There's a little more behind that recommendation than that, but that was just in recognition that it was hard to get that many people to come to consensus. I would encourage you, if you all agree with it, to try to come consensus on a more specific recommendation, because I think the more specific you can get, the more useful it is for DES and potentially Water SC to really understand the intent behind that recommendation and to provide some guidance on, what you think is best. But that's all up to you. If you'd rather back off and do a more general recommendation, that's fine. But if you are all behind the specifics of this one, I would encourage you to be as more specific as possible, because I think that's what's most useful to decision makers that are, beyond this point.
Also, I think if you're not more specific, people who have already looked at this a dozen times and never heard what Jason had to say are going to go back to what they thought before was okay. If that makes sense. They don't understand the difference with me. Right?
Yeah, it's definitely been a contentious issue, and to your point, it is, and to yours, it is more difficult to reach consensus anytime you get into the weeds. It's always, we should not overutilize the resource. I think we would all agree with that. But then you start to get into the how do it and how does it affect each user, withdrawing or non-withdrawing. The contention and the chasm really builds, and we're talking about an issue here that isn't new. It's been brought up a lot, more in some RBCs than others. But even prior to that, I mean, there was a Safe Yield working group, which Joe could speak to, that did a lot of work on this, but some of the proposed alternatives, in my personal opinion, were not, and even the working group acknowledged were not workable. And so you have this delta between what we have now, which some agree is not workable and a problem, but there's a great number that are like, it's fine. In fact, we should de-emphasize safe yield. There should be more safe yield available, which is, I don't think, moving in the right direction, but it's just one opinion. But then you also have this idea that, we should lock down the safe yield a lot more. And I mean, we specifically had legislators and lobbyists say that, the two extremes, either safe yield is a problem because we shouldn't have it, or it's a problem because it is biased. It's an over allocation of the resource. And since we've had broad discussions, both on the legislative and on various stakeholder levels, I mean, I think at some point, somebody needs to point to a middle ground, a compromise. And it's fine for folks to be like, it's not the right middle ground, but to continue to allow the very divergent groups to retreat to their corners and never get to a middle ground lets both sides continue to say it's not a problem or it's a really, really big problem. But the legislators, I think, at the end of the day, they want solutions. And sometimes suggesting a solution can be problematic because nobody's happy with it, because it's a middle ground that nobody likes. But at the end of the day, we've got to find a middle ground or it just will not get brought up. And that's why I brought it up. And one thing I said in the Edisto is, if somebody else has some other reasonable middle ground that's defensible, we should talk about it. But the fact that it's a difficult topic or that there's divergent opinions on it is the very reason why we should, not the reason why we shouldn't get specific, in my opinion.
You also have like a recommendation when it comes to like minimum in-stream flows.
Eventually, we've got a couple bullets.
Okay.
Yes. But I think
Like, I just think that it's, obviously like a broad problem and not just.
It
one
is.
recommendation is going to completely like solve it. So I think it's a like, like situation, not this is like the only like solution.
Yeah.
I was curious, I think they kind of couple together.
And you're right. We've got a couple different suggestions that I brought forth based off of the several of the points that were brought up towards the end of our last meeting that I tried to incorporate in these recommendations. But at the end of the day, I don't want to say we're just the Santee RBC, because we're devoting a lot of time and resources to this. But we're one of 8 RBCs weighing in on the state water plan, right? Hopefully through regulatory and legislative recommendations that will at least get considered by Water SC and our state legislators. And at the end of the day, we're not empowered to make these changes. All we are empowered to do is add kindling to the conversation. And we've got this safe yield topic, other than generalities, has not yet been, to my knowledge, abreast in any of the other RBCs in a substantial way, other than I'd argue in the Edisto. And then Water SC, in the absence of a strong unified recommendation from the Santee RBC, I believe is going to consider safe yield in the opposite direction of what I'm proposing, which I think would be a bigger problem. And we spent so much money on this state water planning cycle between the funding of the legislators have funded the RBCs, they funded Water SC. Some of these issues, if we don't come to middle ground and some middle ground and come to consensus, we're essentially probably kicking the can down the road to a future water planning cycle. And that's, in my opinion, not to anybody's benefit. But that's, I mean, we're at the eighth hour. I think that's where we're at.
Okay, can I vote to put this in the green bin, please? Although I want you to notice I wore my chartreuse blouse so that everyone can picture what's between green and.
Okay.
No, I think we're at a point where some of what we're recommending has to be a SMART goal, right? We can't stay so high level that it's not actionable. And this is important enough that even if it's not perfect, even if there's not complete agreement on it, but it's a step in the right direction, then giving folks at the state level something that they can chew on and really discuss whether or not, I don't know, putting it out there, I think is better than leaving it general, because if we just leave it general, I think you're exactly right. We're just going to keep kicking the can down the road because nobody's willing to have a meaningful conversation about something that's spoken about in generalities.
Or they might have their own recommendation that's not beneficial.
Right.
And Water SC may decide that this is hogwash, but it shouldn't be because we failed to say it.
Before we move on, I'd like to hear what like DS's perspective on this, if y'all don't mind that sharing.
I think it's a fine recommendation. You know, it's something that if there is an opportunity to update the statute and promulgate new regulations would be considered. So I don't really have an opinion on it per se.
Obviously, so the recommendation is picked up by the legislature and they make those changes. Yeah. We're gonna calculate it however it says we have to do it. This is what changes.
Is there a comment on?
I don't think the resource,
Yeah.
like, from the whole perspective, like, helpful, harmful, like.
Well, if it's implemented under the current statutory structure, it would only impact the new users.
Right.
So it wouldn't have much of an impact in the current statutory structure.
Gotcha.
Online, John Grego said, as much as listing standard 80% of median, I think the recommendation is just as important for pointing out the proportion of time safe yield is available under our recommendation as opposed to the current standard.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I haven't really heard any strong opposition to it. Can we just assume that there's consensus behind it? Everybody comfortable putting it in the green bucket and moving forward? Yep, okay, good. Thank you. Lost my green bucket, so I'm just gonna type green, I'm sorry. I think I got a green bucket later, I'll bring it back up, but. Okay, second one. Jason, do you want to speak to this one too?
Yeah, so I mean, as we have these conversations, we're going to eat into some of the other suggestions. So, it's all one topic. How do we make the law better, more protective of the resource, more protective of the withdrawers? And you've got these three user groups, which we have already talked about a little bit, the registrations, the existing or grandfathered permits and the new permits. And there's such an emphasis on existing versus new, and the legislators really weighed in that they feel like there's undue pressure on new. And so this point just says all permits and registrations requesting volumes above safe yield, this 80% median, should be required to develop real contingency capability and plans commensurate with the requested volume, which will trigger at minimum in-stream flow. As is the case in the current law, withdrawals will be allowed to shift back to their primary withdrawal source once the contingency supply has been exhausted. Just this idea that you don't just penalize every new withdrawer, regardless of who they are. Maybe only a third of the allocations being utilized or requested. But in cases where you have increasing amount of the safe yield being utilized, and especially over the safe yield, which will be the case immediately if we change the definition of safe yield, it's when the resource is mathematically going to be stressed most that you should have to have, that's the whole point of contingency, is, hey, what is the likelihood that we're going to have waning stream flows in a major drought? And are we prepared to do something about it? And if you haven't developed any contingency, your hands are pretty tied about what you can do. Your hands are tied anyways, but it just makes sense as we utilize more of the safe yield, especially of the currently defined safe yield, that the contingency requirement should be there. And then we'll talk a little bit about all the different user groups and some of the other recommended points. It's just this idea that could be acknowledged that allocation over 80% median should require contingency because it's only available 60% of the time. Yes. Yes.
If they don't have contingency now, they would have to see in.
I mean, how you would do that in the reg and the law
Yeah.
is, like how you do any of this within the reg and the law is a can of worms. But it's this idea that you would have some mechanism of acknowledging the resource is strained statistically. And that the goal, the SMART goal, like Michael said, is to move towards more contingency. And that doesn't necessarily have to be through negative enforcement. It could be through positive enforcement, grants, a whole host of incentivizations, even within the legislation and the regulation. But it has to start with just acknowledging the fact that, you know, if the resource is over allocated, you're going to need to have more contingency.
So could you, excuse me, give us a real world example of like a situation where that would be, and then what the contingency plan would be? Like someone said, someone would have to drill any well. That's a
So, I mean, let's say you're in the upstate above the fall line, and so wells aren't really a thing, and you're on a water body, and it's your only water body. Contingency is a mess because you can't do wells. You can't just build another reservoir necessarily. Reservoirs take geology, right, being in your favor. Boy, you really probably shouldn't over allocate the resource in an area where contingency is very, very difficult. But let's say you're below the fall line. The contingency probably should be proportional to the demand. And so if you were a small user, maybe you just needed one shallow well. But if you're a really big user, let's use Charleston Water, for example, you probably need to have multiple sources. You need to be able to change the blend or switch to a different surface source and or a ground source if it was available in our area. But the point is, not everybody needs to go build a reservoir. Reservoirs aren't always the solution, but there's a whole host of things folks can do proportional to their use that make more sense or right-sized for their operation. And in some cases, as long as their allocation is well within the safe yield and, you know, the safe yield overall is not all allocated out, maybe there doesn't need to be a contingency.
Well, and I guess, I don't know if this is our business, but let's say I said my contingency was to drill a shallow well. Well, do I have to have the money set aside to do that? How long is that gonna take me? Do I have to do it, be prepared for? You see what I'm saying?
Well,
We have a
one
water
good
shortage,
thing that
we don't have any time.
yeah, that's a very on point. One good thing about the new permit structure right now, because everybody pointing to being bad. The one good thing about the new permit structure is it forces that assessment of availability, the safe yield criteria, and then being a new permittee and based off the safe yield criteria and a couple other provisions, it requires real contingency, the real ability of the new permittee to go and, I'm gonna come into this basin. I now have to calculate not just the cost of operation and starting my facility, whatever that be, but the laws require me to have this level of contingency. So it goes from that cost justification and the feasibility of it. And sometimes it's enough of a feasibility issue that folks go elsewhere where there's more plentiful resources, which I would argue It's the point of the law. But
Well, you know, that's no different from any other user of any utility that comes into the state. I mean, you know, they're gonna do their due diligence and gonna find out, are you close to an interstate? Have you got power? We do will serve letters for all our developers. We contact Grand Strand. Do you have water and sewer capacity in this area? So that's not just for water users. That's for anybody that moves into the state that needs our utility services, our transportation network, our airports. So if somebody's moving in, they're going to do their due diligence, or you would hope that they would.
you would. The reality is, though, we're handing out a safe yield that's defined statutorily that's only available 40% of the time. And so when you come in, whether you be whatever type of withdrawal you are, not picking on any type of withdrawal, and you ask for a certain volume of water because it's in your master plan or it's in your industrial footprint to get this amount of water for your operation, you're going to ask for that, and the state's going to come back based off of the current safe yield criteria and say, we can give you it. And the reality is, though, there's no little star or asterisk underneath that says, oh, by the way,
In the
the
event
law
of
allows
drought,
me to hand out that which is only available 40% of the time. You know as well as I do, whether you're a utility or an industry or even a farmer, if I knew it was only available 40% of the time, really, if I knew it was only available 60% of the time, you're not going to require me to build contingency. We're going to build, in fact, Charleston Water is built in contingency because we've experienced drought. We've experienced water quality issues to the extent that it's required us to have 3 sources way before the current 2011 law was implemented. And I think one recommendation could be that in lieu of, if we're unsuccessful in doing a safe yield definition change, we just communicate water availability with each permit and registration that's handed out. Talk about a positive carrot, but not a negative carrot. It's like, hey, statistically speaking, based off of 83 years of stream flow record if it's available at your point, the amount of water we are giving you by law, we're allowed to give you by law, will be available this percentage of the time. It starts a real conversation internally, if not externally. But back to this point here, it is just this idea that
somebody coming in though, aren't they going to worry? Aren't they going to be concerned about that? Okay, we got a permit. At what point in the future, or what are the odds that water is actually going to be available to withdraw?
I think they should, but there's not a mechanism to educate right now. And I know you're saying that folks should be self-educated, but most people are going to ask the state for water, be granted that water, and not be the wiser to percent available.
I can't imagine somebody like Google coming in here and not asking that question.
I mean, it would be something Joe would have to speak to. Do they ask that question?
I think I wasn't around when Google came to Berkeley County, but I mean, they certainly did their due diligence in their application. And I would think most industries would do their due diligence, and, having conjunctive use as an option and contingency planning is something they should be doing.
So what are your thoughts on this recommendation? It's really just emphasizing contingency. So just trying to make the point that there needs to be more focus on real contingency capabilities.
And it's more general. It's not specific like the previous.
I agree that you should protect those who aren't knowledgeable. So something like this would do that. It would force them to at least take a look at the percentage of availability.
Would it be worth throwing anything in there about conservation measures in addition to contingency? Because that might be more feasible for people to implement quickly.
Yeah, more financially feasible.
Would also highlight that, it's a real possibility you're not going to have a full volume available at times, depending on what's coming through the system. I don't know.
So maybe real contingency and conservation capabilities. In other words, could you curtail?
Right. That's a contingency measure they could take without a lot of capital costs potentially, if they have the ability to slow their operations down.
How about and/or?
I like that.
Online, John said, this may be seen as basin specific since in general, we have more groundwater resources and a major water supplier. Charleston Water already has a robust contingency plan.
It's a good point. Yeah.
I think it is, but if the Saluda, Broad and Catawba basins are over allocated and are not able to have contingency during drought, it threatens the ability of those basins to release downstream to the Santee Basin. And so, during drought, the more people have the real ability to conserve, the healthier the resource will be for everybody, the environment and the
To
downstream.
be honest, I'm more worried about flood than drought.
I
you
think they
take-
all are after this past weekend.
Yeah, you take a storm, like hit Texas and you put it in above Lake Lookout or Lake Hickory in the upper part of the system and you create a dam failure. Then that has consequences all the way to the bottom of the basin.
The last sentence where it says be allowed to shift back to their primary source kind of makes it sound like your contingency has to be 100% from your primary, away from your primary source. That sentence is a little scary to me because, for instance, our contingency would be to supplement with emergency wells and to supplement with another source, but not completely be away from our primary. And so if that sentence isn't necessary,
I think it was to emphasize that the current law, like let's say somebody just throwing out there, somebody has a 20% contingency capability. The current law says that when their primary source is constrained, they need to switch to the contingency, but it may be some fraction thereof of their demand. But the law also says once that contingency is used up, they are allowed to petition back to DHEC and say, hey, we've used up our contingency. This is the worst drought ever. And obviously in some cases, you've conserved, you've curtailed, you've shifted, but you've got to have some fraction in order to maintain, the field or the industry or the municipality. And so it is already within the current law that even if MIF has been, even if you are having to curtail due to MIF, you can go back to the MIF, the stream reach, which is below MIF once the contingency is used up. And so I kind of put that in there to emphasize that that's already the case.
Okay,
It
I
is part of the
understand.
current law that a lot of people maybe don't realize.
okay, I see what you're saying.
So my point is you can do away with all three user groups, putting all three subject to MIF and then have contingency capabilities, and there still be a mechanism within the law always to go back to the constrained source once the contingency is used up. And I can't imagine that would ever be removed. It's
Gotcha.
already part of the law. Will probably continue to be part of the law for a reason.
Jason, how is this different than what's currently being in the law? What is about this is specifically different than what is current? Is it,
It has median in it.
that's the only thing that's,
No, it's this point that we're not picking on new versus existing as much as we're questioning if the resource is being allocated above 80% median. Then
Okay,
there
so
needs to be
80%
contingency.
median.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it-
general. And this is why we oftentimes don't get into the weeds and why I didn't get into the weeds, because the exact way that this would be taken into account and implemented in the law and the regulation is for Water SC and DES to flesh out some of these very valid questions that you guys are asking.
it's just a median really that's different.
Well, and contingency required when allocating above that median, the 80%.
But that's not required now, the contingency.
Only for new users and only above 80% mean. So
So, okay,
this is requiring contingency earlier for new, and I would argue that this should be for all permits and registrations of all, registrations, permits, grandfathered and new, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Our previous recommendation, we already took care of the median part. So
Right.
this one just kind of builds on that, but it focuses on contingency. And I think the point Jason's trying to make is a very general one that there should be more emphasis on real contingency, something that will last a little longer if possible.
And contingency for everybody. If the resource is too important to you to curtail, you probably should have developed a contingency.
Well, and I think where you would get in trouble is if you were specific or mandated how the contingency was gonna work. That's their responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, there's conjunctive, there's contingent, there's curtailment, there's
We're
conservation.
not the contingency police. That's all.
Well, and what's right for one user group might be very different for
Right.
another.
Now, the challenge here is just money. You know, I think everybody would build contingency if money was no object, you know, they don't want to run out of water, but for certain user groups, it's just going to be, it is difficult to add a new well or do an interconnection to an existing system that pulls water from another basin, whatever that contingency might be. So it's just all, in my mind, really about funding and enough money to add more contingency.
And there are some legitimate places within the state that any conjunctive or contingent, resource is almost impossible. And boy, you shouldn't over allocate the resource in those spots.
That's why I like the addition of conservation capabilities. I mean, that costs a little less. Add in, they get to this point, they're already probably implementing drought plans. You're already cutting back, but this just emphasizes that even more. So
The only thing I would add is that they should be supplied to the department. That the contingency plan should be supplied to the department.
To
that's
develop
already-
and submit.
Isn't that already a requirement that contingency plan be
It
submitted?
is for new permits, and even the grandfathered submit through the, not all user groups have to do plans or submit plans, but municipalities have contingency plans and all new permittees have plans. But there are some withdrawals that don't have any kind of contingency and don't have to communicate those plans and send them in. So, but we send it both DNR and DES every time it's updated.
A lot of times when we have to submit plan, or when we have to create plans, for instance, we have a lot of emergency planning for water now. They don't want to see it. They just, unless they come on site to do an audit, they're like, please don't, they don't want everybody to submit every plan. So they may just want to review it when they come on site. I don't know.
Well, Jason, in case of ag, a grower, a farmer may just decide, you know what, it's too expensive for me to develop a contingency based on where they are or sources of water or whatever. They may just have crop insurance, right? So they may say it's more expensive for me to develop a contingency than it is to pay for crop insurance. So my contingency is just to use my crop insurance.
Let it die.
60% of what my yield might have been or whatever that might be.
How does that work? I mean, if you have crop insurance, but you have wells, are your premiums lower?
Yeah, I can't speak to the specifics of that. Sam Quinney's not with us today. Chris Whitmire from Department of Ag is on, but Chris, I hate to put you on the spot. And I know he had another meeting at 9, so he may not be listening. Is Chris still on, or Chris, are you there? Chris, are you there, or you may be multitasking too? So,
He had a 9 o'clock meeting, he must.
yeah, so I'm not sure the answer.
I'm just curious.
But I guess my question to you, Jason, is that acceptable? I mean, if a farmer says, I can't pay to develop contingency, my contingency is just crop insurance.
I mean, I think it's ultimately up to Water SC and SCDS as to what makes it into any legislative or regulatory change. But like I said, maybe for agricultural specifically, it's as simple as communicating to them what the availability of the resource is, so that they know that, they can't have, they may be given this volume of water, but they need to know that there may be 3 major droughts within a 20-year period that only 50% is available, and that way they can plant the fields with the acknowledgement that they may be more constrained during drought and may be utilizing insurance.
Yeah.
But those are details that I think other folks other than me need to be fleshing out what makes sense.
Okay, what do y'all think of this recommendation? Do you want to move forward with a vote or any concerns about it?
I agree with Riley. I just think maybe be more specific. Like, to me, real contingency or conservation, like real could be very subjective to what someone thinks.
Yeah.
So I would be more specific, just like development contingency and conservation plan that I agree, like say submitted to DES or something. I just think real is very subjective.
Well, when DES does, assuming the law and the regulation requires contingency for everybody, which doesn't for everybody right now. But assuming it did, DES is going to look at that permit request. Or if registrations were subject to that registration request and say, hey, this entity has proposed to do this well or this pond. You know, you don't want somebody having a 200-acre plot and saying, I put in a half-acre storm pond. That's going to be my contingency source. To some extent, DES going to be able to weigh whether it's a token. And they would do that for any withdrawal, not just ag, right? Is this really a backup? There should be a mechanism within the law for DES to evaluate whether it's meaningful, and I said real, but whether it makes sense, is right sized. And whether that's a 30% contingency capability or 10% capability, these are conversations for somebody to be had. I just didn't go into that specifics here.
Also, didn't you say they had to submit the form?
Yeah, that's part of an application for a new permit right now that is.
They have to submit the plan. Yeah.
So Leanne, so new permits now have to submit a contingency plan. Registrations don't have to.
The request is low safe yield, we tell them no. And then they have to come back and request the volume within the safe.
The request is above the safe yield.
Then they get rejected.
Okay.
For a registration, if their request is above the safe yield,
Mhm.
we write them a letter saying your request for this, the safe yield calculated with this.
Yep.
And then they can reapply for a volume within the safe yield.
Okay.
They're not required to have the they should be within the safe yield.
For a safe yield that's available 40% of the time.
You just call it contingency, like, what do you call it? Like, what do you, can we just use that same language? Just for consistent, if that's what, I guess I'm just getting stuck on like what's different about this, when you sure that really it's like,
Yeah.
I'm asking for registrations. That's what would be different about this, correct?
It's for the existing ones to have to do the same things. that
What
the
the
new-
measurement being median instead of what it is now.
Right, but is this applying to grandfathered people too?
It starts with all.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Even people that don't really have like, anyone that has like any volume, like they, you know, the people that pre-existed the 2011 law, this applies to. correct?
safe yield.
So is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I know sometimes we want less specific and sometimes we want more specific, but in regard to this specific recommendation, how it would be implemented within the law and the regulation is going to be required nothing but tons of detail. If you're going to apply not only a safe yield criteria contingency requirement to not just new permittees, but existing grandfathered and especially registrations, there's gonna have to be some mechanisms to even do that. And especially if safe yield goes from 80% mean to 80% median, it's gonna mean very specific things for new contingency requirements for existing permits and ag. And it might have to be through a positive incentivization program rather than, you gotta stop, you can't, your permit's getting unwound or whatever. It might be that you need to, over some timeline, work towards some amount of contingency out of the realization that the resource is only available 60% of the time, 40% of the time. But again, I don't know, we could spend all day getting into the weeds about what does that even look like? How do we do that? Let's look at through the provisions of the law and the regulation. They're both very long documents. And I think it's beyond the scope of this meeting to get that much into, trust me, that much into the weeds. It's an important topic, but how Water SC in the state would address it, I don't know.
Have any issue with just adding in supply to the department?
So I think it's a good idea. Yep.
Adding what?
Just saying that they need to supply a good start time.
Submit, maybe,
Yeah, and I-
Where would you like to add that? So,
develop and submit.
something like that.
Real, not imagined, contingent, and or, yeah.
Okay.
Realistic.
And then green bucket this
I-
baby, let's go.
I like realistic instead of real.
Because realistic works both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, these feasibility topics have to be a part of every conversation.
Oops. Okay.
Green,
You want to put this into a green bucket and move on?
vote for green.
Green, baby, green.
Okay.
We're gonna all get t-shirts, green t-shirts that say median on the front.
Well, please don't.
And wear those to water SC meetings, something.
Okay, moving on. Jason, another one of yours.
Minimum in-stream flows, MIF, and minimum water levels, NWL, which aren't talked about as much, should be based on median statistics in recognition that median statistics more accurately characterize typical water availability, since most stream flows are non-normally distributed. In other words, what is statistically true for safe yield and the use of mean and median is also statistically true for MIF. But I'll caveat this with there's nothing more protective for MIF than an appropriately allocated safe yield. And regardless of what that exact number is for MIF, it's still going to be the devil's in the details. What is required to occur when the river reaches MIF? And who does that impact? And that comes back to the contingency. But I can tell you this was not the most popular provision when I brought it up in the Edisto. So, because
Why not?
it is a complex issue.
Why wasn't it, all you're doing is changing?
Because if you look at the 1988
Maybe.
inflow stream study, which I referenced, which went into the first establishment or one of the earlier establishments of minimum in-stream flow requirements, it wasn't just about the quantity. It was also about the realization that you could be at what appeared to be a good quantity of water in a river, but you still might not be able to port a boat in it. In fact, a big component of the study was not just around ecological impact from the standpoint of the fish health, but it was around navigability, around recreation, and this idea that if the river's wide enough, you might have a decent volume, but your kayak or canoe still can't come across the bend. And so it tried to look at all the issues associated with low stream flow, because when low stream flows happen, and they will with any major drought, what is that impact and how do you mitigate that impact, not just to the withdrawers, but also to both the environment and the recreational folks. And so that study pointed out that the most conservative MIF should be used. And so despite it acknowledging the mean versus median argument, it said that even if it's triggering a little early, it is to the benefit of the resource that MIF be a little bit higher for the portability of and navigability of the river. So these are just numbers and math, but when you get into the field, and that's one thing that study did really good, was they looked at different kinds of stream reaches, in the swamps versus in the, like, I don't remember all the different classifications and I'm not an ecologist, but the study was really good at looking at a variety of different rivers and what low flow might look like in those rivers and what the impact of all these different user groups would be during drought. And we've had 3 major droughts in the last 2 decades to really pull from. And that study was before these major droughts. It was really, I think, a lot of the outcome of the 1950s drought. But I think folks, when you start to get at very low river level, are going to have a hard time just focusing on the statistics. They're going to want to focus more on true, real ecological navigability questions. And that's what that study attempted to do. So
How is this different from the first one that we discussed?
the safe yield.
Yeah.
Versus minimum in-stream flow.
The first one was safe yield, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This was minimum, okay.
And then there's also the point that it is not a coincidence that whether you're talking median or mean, safe allocation is 80% and minimum in-stream flow is 20%. The point is it adds up to 100%. The problem is 100% of the median is still only half the time. So there's a lot of nuances here, and you also have the fact that in the current MIF law, you have 20, 30, and 40% MIF requirements depending upon which months of the year you were in, which can add complexity to it. But I'm making the suggestion, and it's up to this council to weigh whether they like it or not.
How can we say we would use median for one measurement and not another?
I think as long as
You use median for everything.
what you do at MIF makes sense and you have an ability to do something at MIF, like contingency, I think the arbitrary number isn't as important as what you're going to do to respond to it. And then two, I would argue if you allocate out with a safe yield, you have less MIF excursions. If you over allocate the resource, you have more MIF excursions. And so the goal would be to avoid MIF excursions. And then if and when they happen, you have real contingency that everybody's prepared to do because they understand the availability. They understand it's statistical fact. When a major drought happens, you will have MIF excursions, and are you prepared for them? So I think I put this up there because I think it's a good idea, but I'm just one vote.
Sold on median.
Green.
Green.
Like medium green, anyone opposed to it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Hey, John,
yeah, go ahead, Scott.
yeah, just should note that, that goes against DNR's in-stream flow policy that I still believe is currently in place. Just pointing that out for the group. For whatever they want to do with it, but that's not DNR policy. It's 80% mean is their in-stream flow policy. So just wanted to point that out.
Everybody still good with,
I'm not completely comfortable with that, or maybe, maybe I can be convinced, but I just need to think about this one a little bit more. So for me, it's yellow bucket.
okay. Do you need more information? Do you want to have a further discussion about it later? Do you just want to think about it more?
We can have a further discussion about it later.
Okay. Okay, let's yellow it, but we'll try to address any concerns you have later.
Just, I am too. I'm a yellow on that too.
Okay. Is there a comment, Megan?
John said, I think the recommendation needs to be consistent with our safe yield recommendation, as others have pointed out.
Okay. Okay, let's go to the next one. Jason?
MIF and MWL should be calculated as a net flow or level based on the hydrology present, considering tidal influences and or the periodicity of intermittent upstream discharges if downstream of a licensed or otherwise flow controlled impoundment. This is a loaded one, but the law already has different MIF criteria definitions depending upon whether you're within an impoundment, downstream of an impoundment, a reservoir, or not downstream of an impoundment and in a stream reach. And so that's already somewhat in the law. But one thing that isn't in the law anywhere is that as you get coastal and you start to have stream reaches which are impacted by this natural non-anthropological impact called the tide change that happens every single day, there's nothing within the law, even if you have stream flow, net stream flows, which are in well excess of 20, 30, 40% MIF. In some cases, stream reaches which the net flow, net daily flow is 60% or more of the minimum stream flow requirements. This thing happens with the moon and the tides every single day where the stream slows or even reverses. And by a strict adherence to the current law, MIF is not being maintained. And the reality is that the law was promulgated without taking into account several significant coastal communities across the state, almost as if South Carolina wasn't a coastal state. And so I think that's a problem. And as we would need to look at this concept that as long as the freshwater releases and the net flow of the stream is well above even 60% MIF, is it really true to say MIF isn't being supported? It'd be like going to a basin like the Sakahatchee or something, or the lower PD, where maybe you don't have any withdrawals, and saying the river's impaired in regard to stream flow twice a day because the tide. And the law is supposed to be protective of anthropological impact. It should take into account the natural environment. And so we're not talking about complicated math here. But there's also the periodicity of discharge that needs to be taken into account. And in some cases, for example, on the Cooper at the Panapolis Dam applicable to this basin, an average weekly release volume is required. And so there may be a day where there isn't a release, or barely it misses the contracted release volume, but over the period of the week, it's 4,500 cubic feet per second per day, but on a weekly average. And so if you grab the right day in 365 days, you might have a day where the contract appears to not be being met, or MIF is not being met. But the reality is it is being met. There's 70% of the flow is fresh water. The flows exceed MIF by 70%. And yet by strict adherence to the current law, it would almost look like there wasn't enough water availability because the tide.
Yeah, we have to call Michael and have him put some,
Which
See
they
what?
Yeah,
call Michael and have
There's
him
a-
put some in.
there are also salinity alarms.
Yeah.
that We
Yeah.
react to if there's a push, a high, particularly high king tide or something.
Yep.
And all that's outlined.
It is. And so I bring up that one case study, but there are other case studies across the coast of South Carolina where the fact that the law literally does not have any provision around taking into account non-anthropological hydrology. It would look like MIF is not being met, the criteria is not being met, when in reality it is.
So,
If defined based off of the obvious natural cycle.
so given our coastal, we would definitely want to bring bucket that. We're so subject to tide, and also whatever Santee Cooper does.
Leanne, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to add to this? Has this come up before for coastal permits? Is it?
So there have been some cases where we have an area that is highly influenced site. And one thing we have looked at instead of general flow is that salinity. So we looked at the example I believe was in the was it in Georgetown, Baltic area, the yeah. So we were looking to see, we looked at how the tide would influence the water quality for the user, and that because there was plenty of water there. And we're making sure that the quality is taken up for the user whole and not make the quality worse, if that makes sense. So we were looking at the fluctuation of the salinity or connectivity to make sure that whatever they were requesting was not going to cause the level to get to such a point that that stretch. That was kind of the way we reviewed that site.
Does this issue currently impact anybody in the Santee River Basin?
Yes.
I feel more comfortable making this a little bit more general and just saying that like DHEC can use like a different flow regimen or flow model within like the calculations. As the
Push.
Something like consideration needs to be made for those tidally influenced.
I don't think even going that far. I think it's just saying that, you know, based on like circumstances, like DHEC can determine if a different flow regimen, like would be appropriate in determining, it might happen.
Like if more complex hydrology is present.
Yeah, for a certain region, right?
Well, is that in fact kind of what you've already done, Leanne, in the example you just gave us? you just switched to looking more at water quality impact and salinity. And I'm assuming you did that because there's already a mechanism that allows you to do that when you're considering a permit. Is that a fair statement or?
Very site by site specific, but yeah, we looked at it from that angle because we knew that it was like y'all were saying, it's complex, like y'all knew, it's. We knew that the water was bigger. It's knowing what makes sense for that site.
And I think it's good when departmental means and methods and procedures can get at some of these complexities, but it's always nefarious. You don't want to get so detailed in the law that your hands are tied, but you also don't want the law and the regulation to be able to be interpreted in a way to prevent permits or registrations when the water is available. And I'm not saying I don't trust the departmental procedures, but it would be, in my opinion, better if it was explicitly mentioned in the law and the regulation that the department was able to do that. They were able to look at the more complex hydrology present. It isn't obvious in the current law and the regulation that they're able to do that. I'm glad that they're doing that, but it is in the law and the regulation.
What was the suggestion then for a more general one? Got it on paper here.
Basically letting that use alternative flow regimens. Not maybe appropriate. Or specific region strain.
Due to complex hydrology present.
You're using more water quality for that.
That, for those.
So should this be alternative ways of, I don't know, like using, it's not really a flow, is it really a flow regime?
Yeah, no,
It's just about water quality.
Um,
What would be the most appropriate wording on it?
Well, you could say flow regimes and or water quality considerations.
Yeah.
Taking into account water quality considerations. And the benefit of that is there's already a little bit of that in the MIF criteria right now, in as much as it talks about ecological impact.
That'd cover the fact that their salinity monitors the mouth of Bushy Park, for example, which do dictate part of our contracted flows. The provisions in the contract for us to increase flows if we need to avoid salinity intrusion into that reservoir. Just knowing its criticality.
What's the time lag on moving the salinity wedge? You increase flows, what's the time lag? How long does it take to push it back?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
I mean,
Probably
if
situation.
you look at like box and whisker plots of salinity at the different USGS stream gauges across the Cooper Basin, and you look at how the salinity alerts are triggered, whether it be due to a storm tide or a king tide in the absence of precipitation, or you hit one of these days where there's a low discharge, relatively low discharge volume. I mean, it isn't immediate, just like the tide isn't immediate, but we're
Right.
talking hours, not days.
Okay.
So
One tide cycle?
yeah, it's very quick, and due to where the withdrawals are within the Bushy Park, it has been very effective at reducing, definitely prolonged salinity in incursions or intrusions, but in most cases, minimizing them too. I mean,
Okay.
dilution occurs.
Are those flow regimes or flow regimen?
But yeah, I actually don't like the word regimes or regiments. It's,
Flow.
what you're doing is like a
Patterns.
flow analysis or something,
Analysis.
right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. You have a better word for us here?
Yeah, I mean, I need to, you do assessment.
That work? What do y'all think? Do you like the version, the second bullet version?
I think it just has to have MIF or an NWL in it somewhere in order to get to the point. When considering MIF and NWL criteria for new permits. so that people know what we're even talking about.
Okay. This one, as it's included in the chapter, may need some additional discussion. If somebody just comes across this, feel like they may not understand what the intent of it was. So Jason, I may need to work with you just to add some explanation as to why this recommendation is being posed. Make sense?
It does. And for everybody that's not, you know, whether you're a green bucket, yellow bucket, or red bucket on all these things, you will get a chance to write in your comments and respond to every single section of the finals plan when we finally get there. So, I mean, this isn't the last word you get today. You know, this is just, can we put it in the plan for future comment?
Yeah, it's fine to change your mind later on after you've kind of received all the information we intend to present.
I might change my mind, might decide median's a bad idea between now and then. It's unlikely.
Will, you're not doing it.
Okay. So I think I hear that everybody's comfortable with the more general recommendation. Gonna keep moving if that's all right. Okay. Okay, the next one is Alan online?
Yeah,
He had to jump off.
He had to jump off.
He did say, oh, did meant to
These
say.
guys got it.
he said you could talk about
He
it.
said, please present my draft for discussion.
Okay. Alan submitted one yesterday. We kind of talked about this before. Alan was looking for more consistency between surface water and groundwater permitting systems. And his recommendation that you see on the screen is also kind of consistent with one that Jason brought up. But so it says basically that existing regulations should be amended to align users' renewal periods and permit requirements for both surface and groundwater as much as reasonably possible. That was the first thing he was trying to do. You know, his concern is that the 5-year period for permit renewal on groundwater users is a little limiting when they have to make infrastructure decisions that cost a lot of money. So he was looking for more alignment with surface water, which is typically 30 or more years, right, Leanne? Yep. So his first, I guess, part of this recommendation is that the surface water law should be amended to require all surface water withdrawals over 3 million gallons a month to be subject to permit requirements and review. I'm not sure how that's any different than what's already there,
I
but
think he's trying to say, like, right now, people that are grandfathered in, they're just users. They don't really operate under a permit, which it sounds like most of the users on the basin are grandfathered, or there's only a few new permits. I think what the intent of this with groundwater, no matter when you started withdrawing, you have to have a permit, you know?
Yeah.
So the intent of this is to try to, because all these changes are recommending are really going to be applied to a very small volume of water users. A very small number of water users and a small volume of water compared to the actual people who are withdrawing. So the intent is just to try to capture that.
okay.
And also, we're subject to change. Our permit gets renewed, we can get cut or increased. Or groundwater permits, people that are locked in, they're locked in for what they have forever. So
Okay, so basically he just
trying to
said
align both of them will be similar.
we should throw out the grandfathering and subject everyone to review. Okay. I can't, all the RBCs are running together, but I can't remember if we approved back in May. I have to go back and look at our notes. The general recommendation that some of the other RBCs approved, which was basically reassessing grandfathered permits. I'll have to go back and look at our break. I can't remember if y'all approved that or not. Does anybody remember?
I know we tabled the idea of combining the three because we didn't have the ag representative.
This is the one I'm talking about, basically. Improve the current laws that allow for regulation of water use so that they are enforceable and effective. Current water law, which grandfathers most users, needs to be improved. So it's a very general one that didn't go as far as what Alan's suggesting, which is let's just take the next step and open everybody up to review. It's that kind of moving towards that, but not going outright and saying that. And I think y'all did approve this one. But This recommendation goes further, goes one step further.
Does this recommendation, it's just for permits only? Or is it for ag too, or whatever I forgot the word that.
Registration.
Registration.
Yeah, well,
Is
no,
it-
it's, here he's suggesting all surface
All
water withdrawals.
Withdrawals, okay.
Yeah. Be
Over
subject,
3 million gallons.
over
Yeah.
3 million, yeah, so all over that threshold, be subject to permit requirements and review. And was Alan suggesting to get rid of registrations and
Correct.
permits, and everybody's just a permit
Just like the groundwater permit.
in the
no matter
coastal?
your use
in the
type,
coastal
You have
plan.
to get a permit.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So this is actually then doing two things. You know, we've talked about the potential recommendation that a few of the other RBCs made, or maybe at least one, of get rid of permits and registrations, just go to a permitting system, which is already the case again for groundwater in the coastal plain, but not the case for upstate water users north of the fall line. And the second part of then his recommendation is that the Groundwater Use and Reporting Act should be amended to reflect a 30-year permit renewal period to facilitate long-term planning efforts, support bond issuance, protect investment, as opposed to the current 5-year reviews, which occur consistent with when the capacity use areas are reviewed every 5 years.
It basically is trying to marry surface and groundwater in the
Yes,
same permitting.
As
Right.
much as possible, yeah.
as much as possible, yeah.
And it's not just bond issuances. Imagine an ag user come in and get a loan for a plot, and they want to get a certain amount of withdrawal. I doubt that loan's gonna be a 5-year loan. And imagine they get a 30-year, 50-year, whatever they need to get loan to implement various agricultural things. Then 5 years down the road, they come in and say, hey, there's a new industrial groundwater user that's making us revisit whether your allocation's appropriate. The allocation is no longer available, you know, and then all of a sudden you've got a loan for capital investment and, you know, land that you can't even fully utilize.
And that's
Well, I said ag, but it could apply to any user. Could be a municipality that's already invested or an industry. Yeah, let's say they've applied and been granted. So
the new industrial user. Got the permit.
have you guys ever had to reduce a groundwater permit based off of
And you use-
capacity use?
Yeah. We have reduced users based on their actual reported historical use. But that was with conversation with the permittee. We've never just said, very rarely have we, I think only one case I can think of. That we have reduced a permittee against what they wanted to do. For the most part, it is a discussion with the permittee. And it is something like, someone comes in, they'll get a permit for some large amount based on our assessment, and then after a 5-year cycle, we might say, okay, we're gonna maybe it's an ag user, maybe they're still in the growing period, maybe they're still, you know, figuring out what they want to grow, give them another 5-year cycle, and then we say, okay, if you've been using, you know, you've got a permit for 100 million gallons a year, and you've been using consistently 30. So we're talking to this farmer, and we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna give you 30 plus 20%. If 30 is like the max they can use it. We're gonna give you 30 plus 20%. But that would be a conversation we have with that applicant. We wouldn't just do that.
All you're trying to do there is just align the permit to the
Correct.
real
Yes.
utilization of the resource.
Special user wanted to come in after a permit, we would be taking into account that are around them. Issue that problem.
What has been Mount Pleasant's experience that was, because I
Right. that was
remember
the-
it.
That was the one that was referred to.
Yeah, because I remember that, and it caught a lot of attention of other utilities saying, well, wait, what happened?
We got cut
You got.
because another big industrial user come into the same.
That is not why you were cut. That is not why they were cut.
But, and they cut us significantly, we had to work back up to get what we wanted, what we believe, what we would need for build out. But we were actually cut below that,
And a lot of,
and we were cut by 60%.
and that was due to actual drawdowns and some depression developing in the area, but it had nothing to do with the user coming in. Nothing to do with that. There's two separate things.
So that was because of a condition hydraulically that
Yes.
there was a concern?
Yes.
So is that the reason why, groundwater permits are reviewed every 5 years because conditions change? If we didn't have a 5-year
No.
renewal, what would be the?
That is not the. So I wasn't there when that was decided.
If I can just step in, I think there could be some discussion on increasing that, say, 10 years for a groundwater permit, because cuts and pressure can develop within 10. If you take it out to 30, you could develop an issue where you miss an opportunity to create conditions to keep that aquifer sustainable if you let it go that long.
Okay,
So I
that's
think that's something that should be considered in this discussion.
because a lot can change in your
Yeah.
groundwater and your aquifer.
5 years
saltwater.
may be too short, but
Yeah.
10 might be more reasonable.
And like I said, I wasn't there when that 5 years was decided upon. But I will say one benefit of these 5-year cycles, and even if we've set it to 10, is the evaluation that we do. So there is an evaluation done that year before the permit cycle starts, which can help inform our permitting. So we use like the prop maps that the hydraulic group put together. We look at the real withdrawal data that occurred in that area. We look at all the permits that have come in and gone. It's a whole evaluation that we do of the area, and that helps inform our renewal process for the next year. Because like we get recommendations that come out of that evaluation. So we might say like, okay, we can't be issuing increased volumes out of certain aquifers in certain areas if we've been experiencing drawdowns in those areas, like seeing these increased drawdowns. But if we've seen rebound in those areas, then we can say, okay, let me open that back up. And, you know.
So a drawdown is like a water shortage and.
Amount of water.
That, yeah, it's, so I think of like cone of depression. So like if you were to look at a map of the aquifer, kind of looks like a, lead map. Look at a map, got like, looks like this. It kind of looks like that, an aquifer map. So if you've got a drawdown, your lines are kind of coming together because it's going down. And so we've got, if we have an area where something like that develops and gets worse over time, we might limit new users from coming in. So a lot of times that means in our renewal cycle, the people that already have a permit in an aquifer, we would reissue them for what they have. We just maybe wouldn't give them an increase.
Well, so what you're saying basically is the renewal period is what triggers the study. So that wouldn't mean anything wrong with increasing the renewal period so long as the study element,
Yeah, we would continue to do that.
right, stay the same. So going to 10 years, ensuring that there is a careful review every 5 years.
So why are we
Doing
doing,
a 5-year evaluation with 5-year permit.
so why are we doing the same thing with surface water?
Well, I think that,
Well,
I
certain
think
parts of
groundwater and surface water,
it's so different.
It's different.
hard to say like, I mean, that's so much, the way that surface water is impacted, that, like it can be such short time frame, then you get.
you can
more
see a
frequent
trend
events.
going on in groundwater, where
Yeah.
you've got an area of concern developing. And the capacity use program has been successful in addressing that
Yeah,
through not allowing permit increases or not allowing, certain aquifers to be utilized in certain areas. And we've seen that be successful through time. Where you can't really predict when the next drought is going to come or see those trends as easily as you can in groundwater.
Yeah, but you can still, determine how much water you can allocate by seeing trends over an amount of time. To keep from over allocating and kind of see where you're at if you review it. Cause I mean, y'all reviewing not even every 30 years, you're just kind of issuing permits out, people get what they got and
You're speaking to groundwater?
No, surface water.
But Tony,
We're not issuing many new permits
Right.
in surface water. We've issued 8 new permits since 2000.
So y'all never had any issues with surface water? People being over allocated or anything like that?
I mean, I don't, in the time
Y'all,
evaluating new permits,
but you're just evaluating new permits, you have to evaluate,
we don't really have an opportunity to evaluate the grandfather.
We haven't even gotten to a renewal yet, we would do an evaluation.
and Tony, I don't think Alan is arguing
No.
that everybody should be taken to 10, to be clear. Everybody should be taken to 30.
right?
And to Mike's point, one compromise would be to instill the effort to unify, make it a little bit more understandable, but take into account the very real concerns of the hydrology changing, but also the investment concerns. Because I mean, if the water isn't available, bonds or loans or not, we need to figure this out, right? So we would need to revisit it. One thing that we could potentially do is say 30-year review periods, but if the resource is not being used or a real water quality or quantity issue develops, you could revisit it within 10, but that 10 years should only occur if there is a real reason to do so, not
The studies
arbitrarily.
support.
And I would argue even bandwidth wise, I mean, if you took every single permit and registration, surface and ground across the state and went to something like 5 or even 10 years, the state would be in perpetual review cycle. Let's go ahead and tenfold the size of their department. And I don't want to get too much into bandwidth because that's going to be their case. But my thing is, they're monitoring, DNR and DES is monitoring groundwater conditions. We've got continuous monitoring all across the basin on surface conditions, both during drought and not. If there are real issues developing, there should be a mechanism within the law to look at an impacted part of the state, surface or ground, at some earlier increment. Like you shouldn't be hands tied. We see a train wreck that could happen in 10 years and we're tied for 30 years and we're just going to slow roll watch this 30-year disaster unfold and we could have done something about it. But it doesn't mean that everybody should go under a 10-year review period. You could do both. You could say 30-year permits and for surface and ground, but if a real issue develops, it can be reviewed earlier at 10 years. Or if it's a fake registration or permit and they're not utilizing it, that should also potentially, cause a review at 10 years. Because that's another issue that could happen is you lock up capacity for 30 years, or you could lock up capacity for the lifetime in the case of registration and it not even be a real withdrawal. And the law right now doesn't really allow for that to be looked at.
The department can make a decision to revoke the permit, and that's any permit, not just new.
So spoiler alert, my next recommendation will be a 10-year review cycle if there's a reason to do so. But following Alan's recommendation right here of a 30-year standard for bond issuances, for loans, for general planning and a reasonable review period, my vote would be for the 30-year for both ground and surface. Take into account that we could have a 10-year in the next recommendation. But I don't think it's right. I don't think we should be moving everybody to 10 years. I think we should be moving everybody to 30.
Is Mickey available for comment? Or anyone representing Mickey's representation?
Yeah, I reached out to Mickey and I didn't get a response. I was hoping he could be here today, but didn't get a response. So no, Chris Whitmire is listening in from South Carolina Department of Ag, because Sam Quinney wasn't able to make it. But I don't know if Chris, if you're on right now, if you can hear us.
Be up there.
Last there, but yeah, I know he had a meeting at 9 or earlier this morning, but yeah, unfortunately, we don't have. Is that Chris?
I'm here.
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, Chris. And Chris qualified his attendance this morning to say he's not as technically astute as Sam. Sam's been attending all these RBC meetings. Chris is on the marketing side. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so he may not be able to speak on behalf of ag, and he's certainly not an RBC member representing ag, but he can provide insight as needed. Did you have a specific question, Sarah, about ag?
Well, this is frustrating because I'm not the farmer, so
Yeah.
I can't, I represent agriculture, but I don't. Like, I wonder where the 3 million, like, 3 million seems like a great place to be, right? I don't know, I'm wondering what they need, what ag need, where do they fall in the permitting and registration family?
Ag is registered, they're all registrations. for
Right.
this water.
What are their review periods?
They do not expire.
The lifetime.
They're they're not transferable, but they're within the family.
Is there an amount that I'm sure you don't have that answer.
Yeah, we're talking about
Like
three
a
different
gallon.
things, kind of, actually, yeah. So we do need to kind of tackle this one in pieces.
That's the same threshold for everybody.
What's the significance of the 3 million? I think you just said it on
If you
your.
need if you withdraw 3 million or more a month, you need a permit or registration.
Okay,
It's everybody.
okay,
And ground and surface, same threshold.
okay, that's where
It
that.
equates to approximately 100,000 gallons a day. About that.
And that limit's never been debated in any other RBC meeting. I mean, everybody seems to be comfortable with that amount as a threshold for when you need a permit or registration.
Yeah, I just didn't know where that came, or
Is there-
remember where that came.
Just a question, is there any monitoring at all of those who fall below that line?
Leanne's shaking her head no. It's kind of self-monitoring, basically.
There's no reporting requirements.
None at all.
We've had a few people that when they fall below the 3 million, we do let them know and see if they want to keep their registration or not. And some folks do keep it, just continue to report. And some people have a registration for greater than, they theoretically would use more than that, but then they report, like 2.5 a month or something. And they keep it because if there is like, let's say over the dry year or something, they want that ability to just do it and not worry about, oh, no, I have to go and get my registration because.
Right.
So we do have folks that report below the threshold, but still have a registration. In the event that they would be to withdraw.
Okay, since this one covers kind of three different topics, let's just start at the top. And I want to ask everybody, do you like the idea of aligning renewal periods a little more? We talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Seems like there was some consensus in potentially increasing the groundwater renewal period to make it more consistent with surface water.
I don't agree with groundwater going to 30 years. I think that's pretty extreme, but
Okay.
I would say, 10 would be more reasonable. That's just my opinion. I think it would be pretty extreme for us to say a groundwater permit should be 30 years.
Okay, so let's tackle that.
I think 30 is fine as long as the caveat's in there that it is analyzed on a 5-year basis like it is now. And then if there is, again, groundwater is a lot more predictable than surface water. It's more consistent. But you need to be able to look at it.
Yeah, I would say it's harder to respond to a condition, a bad groundwater type condition, because recharge takes a lot longer.
Right.
So if you start to create a cone of depression or a saltwater ridge starts to move in, your ability to respond and limit that or mitigate those impacts takes a lot longer because of long time of groundwater travel and recharge.
Right.
Brooke, is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement.
Yeah.
Unless you have a large user that maybe suddenly stops, which has been the case in other basins, or we've seen a rebound with a very long decline, but it is slower to respond. And that water pressure is moving very slowly through the geology, getting, to the point where you're measuring it. So, much slower.
So the review needs to continue, I think. And the permit's contingent upon what's available. So
Yeah.
I think you could marry the times as long as you review it at a 5-year interval.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we'll come back to that one, because Jason's got a recommendation that kind of focuses on that on the next slide. The second part of this recommendation is pretty big, because it's suggesting that we get rid of registrations and permits for surface water and just go to a permitting system. We've talked about this recommendation, but we've always kicked the can down the road because we haven't had ag representation in the room. In the other RBCs, the ag folks have said, no, we like the current system. We don't want to have to get permits. We'd rather stick with registrations. For a number of reasons. Even though, again, for groundwater, they're already required to get permits in the coastal area. So in your basin, permits are the only option for ag for groundwater, but a surface water ag user can get a registration.
Do we have any idea how much water or that is that are registered, surface water registered? If it's 5%, then who cares? But if it's 30%, then, you know, or more or something, that it just depends on how much registrations really have tied up in their capacity, you know.
In your basin, you mean?
Yeah,
specifically?
yeah, in our basin, in this basin.
There's not much out of the
Yeah, I would say it's like more like 5% or less. I mean, it's pretty low.
Yeah, and I think one thing we gotta be careful about statistics is statistics can be made to look like a lot of different things. Probably a lot of people will look at my points from mean and median and say that. But when you say ag is only 5%, let's just use that number since you brought it up, of the capacity. But the fact is that they may only be withdrawing that 5% during 4 months of the year. So that point was brought up in the Edisto that, hey, ag only uses a third or a quarter of the allocation. But the reality was in June and July, when the resource was most stretched, they used half the resource. And so to make them completely exempt and have lifetime, or not really lifetime, forever registrations, no review period, with no requirement for contingency, and not, you know, not subject to the same criteria is a little dangerous based off of, well, they're only 5 or 10% of the resource. Well, when the resource is needed most during June and during a drought, they're a really big part of the resource. And so to just ignore them, especially in some cases where we're not talking about a mom and pop, we're talking about a very, very large agricultural user that you got to take into account how big they are. It's every bit as important to understand their impact on the resource. You can't ignore it just because they happen to be ag.
I think also by bringing everyone under a permit, it provides some clarity and consistency and can simplify like the permitting process. So I'm all for it, and I think that there's a way to make that a little bit cleaner. But I'm all for it.
Well, we have to make a decision. In the broad RBC, I think they're the only ones that said what this is saying, that there shouldn't be separate registrations and permits for surface water. There should just be permits. And the reason part of the reason they came to that consensus was that there really was not a lot of ag representation in the broad RBC. They don't do much ag surface water use up there, even less than you do down here.
Also plan to be like publicly, you know, noticed, and people will be able to review, including ag and.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. But that was the decision they came to. If y'all want to come to a similar decision, that's up to you. I just want to point out there's not really ag in the room to speak up, and it is what it is.
Concern, yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't mean that you can't move forward with your recommendation. It's just the way it is.
And when you look at if this recommendation is going to encompass all three groups, existing permits, new permits, and registrants, we're quibbling over 10 versus 30 or 20-year review periods. The reality is somewhere between 5, if we're going to talk about groundwater, and forever, and no review. And so it's one thing to argue over a couple decades, you know, this way or that way. It's a whole nother to be like, you're now going to be subject to review and you never have been before. And you wonder, well, why they might not be in favor of that. It's not in their best interest. There's going to be a huge political push to unify both ground and surface and all three user groups under a review period, let alone a some reasonable timeline that we can all agree on that makes sense and is protective of the users and the resource. Can't pretend like that's not the case.
So what's y'all's feeling on the highlighted part here, which would effectively get rid of registrations and require just permits for surface water users? Are you wanting to move forward with that recommendation?
I am.
You are,
Just make it a little cleaner.
what would you suggest?
Basically saying, permits should be required for all new and existing, surface water withdrawals over 3 million gallons a month, including for users withdrawing, since before 2011 and registered users.
Okay, so that it's saying the same thing. You just want to make sure it's not misinterpreted. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think send you out what's easier or email you that.
Okay. Do you ever want to follow that? It's saying the same thing. She's just adding more language so that somebody doesn't read it and misinterpret what it's
So
suggesting.
what if you just put in the parentheses after surface water withdrawals, the three groups that we're talking about? In other words, if somebody's misinterpreting what all is,
Existing,
we're saying what all means.
new, and
Existing, which is same as grandfathered, new, and registrants. Or registrations.
does that work?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, there's no other group outside of those three, right? DES.
Okay, is anyone opposed to removing registrations for surface water and requiring them to get permits?
I think even like the language that I kind of like proposed, like, that be subject to permit requirements, like the existing ones, like, just like, I think that's a broader topic. I don't know, just having permit requirements on there, confuses things a little bit. But
So how are you saying that would need to change?
just basically like, so I think that the permit requirements then would need to be developed for ag, so, maybe it's fine, maybe I'm really
But if
complicated.
they don't have permit requirements, that's why they're a registration.
Yeah.
So we should keep them registration, is what you're saying.
Are you saying there should be separate permit requirements for ag users?
Maybe, probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's, well, Leanne, for groundwater permits that are ag, is it a lower fee than, no?
Well, one, groundwater has no. So groundwater applications are all, there's no fee.
Okay,
And ag withdrawals for groundwater are treated the same as any other withdrawer. There is no difference between a registration, there is no registration.
yeah,
They're all permits.
there's no difference in the permit regardless of the water use sector for groundwater.
No, we have slightly different questions depending on your sector, right? So ag, we need their acreage and crops, that way we can kind of think about how much water is reasonable for what they need. But same thing with water suppliers, we request, how many taps, what's the population, what is there any growth, are you selling to any industries?
Yeah.
An industrial user, they would tell us like what they're doing, what their process requires, what makes sense for their process. Golf course, we ask how many acres, what type of grass they're growing, wedding agents, that sort of thing. I mean, those types of things are slightly different for each sector, but everyone, it's one application, everyone's treated the same.
Yeah.
Everyone has this, and it's the same renewal cycle for everybody in an area. So even though it is 5-year permit cycle for groundwater, let's say you come in halfway in the permitting cycle, you get renewed with everyone else. You may have only had the permit for 2.5 years. You get renewed at the same time everyone else does in your area. So that way everyone's on the same renewal cycle. So that's the other side of that too. So right now, everyone in the PD area is at the same time for groundwater.
Okay.
And that way, that helps us with our evaluation. So when we do our evaluation, we're looking at the area as whole, and then we renew everyone at the same time.
Okay,
What if we just said 3 million gallons a month to have to get a permit? Then what wording would you suggest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we separate the Like maybe put that in like a different slide or something, just so it's clear what we'd like agreed on.
Just hit return after.
Sarah, saw you kind of wondering whether you were going to decide to support it or not. You were making a face. Are you?
Is it wrong for me to ask for a break?
No, no.
Brooke and I were just talking about lunch and it's not time for that yet,
No,
but
just
maybe
right.
a mental break.
Yes.
We don't, if we feel like we've got momentum.
Yeah, no, we were going to do a break at 10:50 anyway, but we do have
Okay.
another
Hang in
4 or
there for 5
5.
more minutes.
Yeah, we have another 4 or 5 recommendations to consider. So we can do a 10-minute break now and then come back to it.
Well, I just feel like when I talked to Sam and I talked to Mickey, I don't know, I understand we have to make a decision, but I would love to hear what they have to say somehow. Maybe that's not possible. And I know we're gonna revisit these things as well.
Yep.
So,
Okay. Okay, let's leave this one as is now. I'm gonna put this one in a yellow green, but I'm at chartreuse. Is that chartreuse?
yes,
Yeah.
this color, we need to add a bucket and color with all the AI and graphics technology we have it contained, right?
I think, yeah, basic, you might want to put a caveat. We want some ag input.
Okay.
And maybe not just, we can't live with that, but how could, if we want to compromise somehow, what could you find out from us before you made a decision somehow, like something? You know what I mean?
And it can work both ways too. Like it protects reasonable use for new farmers coming in
Yeah.
where there's a registration that is fraudulent or
Right, or,
overreaches.
right,
Like
is it
that's
just a stopgap fake measure or whatever? Yeah, you don't want that.
right.
Whitmire with
Okay.
SCDA.
Hey, go ahead, Chris.
Can you all hear me? Hey,
Yes, we
yeah, I was
can.
just gonna add, and I know we talked about this before the meeting started, but just to let everybody else know, he suffered an injury yesterday. He's okay. He really wanted to be here today, and I know it's important for us to have representation here. So just want to let you know that he wasn't here because he's not here because he's not here because he had better things to do, but he had a issue, and so he's getting better. But I'd want to hear what's the best way. I know y'all have questions about what AG's position is or what SCDA's position is. If there's a way for me to get those questions to him and somehow provide that response, I'm happy to do that. So sorry, I can't provide that directly, but I'm here as a liaison to somehow get that to him if you need it before the next meeting, or I'm here to do whatever y'all think would be helpful.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I'll get with you after the meeting, but we have talked about this specific recommendation at past meetings where Sam has been, and he's provided some input on this one.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of sure I know where he stands on it, but again, he can advise, but he's not a RBC member.
Okay.
But we certainly appreciate his advice.
Yeah, I'm just speaking up just to say, hey, I'm here to, if I can get some information for you, I'm happy to do that. And whatever's helpful for y'all, I'd be happy to do.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
All right, let's do a short break. It's 10:53 and we'll try to start up again right at 11 for those online. And again, restrooms are through those doors here. There's some water over there. I'm sorry.
It's a door operator.
I believe so. It's just a.
Oh, it doesn't go out loud.
And then I finished it. I
just texted Scott.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for doing it. And I talked to everybody. I really want
You guys have any meetings tomorrow you can take?
I don't think so. Yeah.
There's a summer camp going on right now here. Maybe the kids need some lunch.
Need some
Hey,
lunch.
John,
Lunch, got
Yeah.
extra lunch.
did
Yeah.
the guy from Dupree show up?
Yeah, he just dropped off.
They were
Lunch.
they were never sent a PO because there was never one made. So he,
Well. Yeah, I don't know. He's here. He already-
Lunches?
2 lunches, yeah. Joe's happy.
Can we get like a to-go box?
Yeah, actually, the second lunch is coming.
well, I don't know if the guy from Dupree's can get paid.
Well, yeah, you'll have to worry about that. It's not a big deal. Better have 2 lunches than no lunch.
Scarlett wanted a piece of chicken.
It's gonna be enough rolls, everyone that.
Oh, there's enough rolls.
Yeah. We should are like.
Yeah.
With butter.
We've already.
Okay.
Okay, let's start back up.
Serving the rolls.
So I'm gonna.
Let's jump into the suggesting.
Let's all get in the bus and go to Mickey's farm. How long would that take?
An hour and a half. Well, it's probably.
Okay, so Alan was suggesting a 30-year permit renewal period. We've talked about, kind of a hybrid approach to that. Jason has a recommendation that says a withdrawal review may occur as soon as every 10 years if monthly withdrawals by the permanent and registered user are not at least 10% of the allocation. So yours is getting a little more into the weeds, Jason.
I know, we keep moving back and forth towards less specific and more specific. The whole point of this was to apply reasonable use criteria to try to screen out registering that weren't in a withdrawal. Or really anybody that's not withdrawing. If you're not withdrawing, you don't want to hold up that allocation for 30 years.
For existing, so we've already approved that recommendation that says, reasonable use criteria should be. That was one of the consistent recommendations, this guy up here.
Right.
Should allow for reasonable use criteria to be applied to all surface water withdrawals. In one case, the Upper Savannah said just new surface water withdrawals. All the other RBCs just said all surface water withdrawals. Yours is, I guess, taken a little bit.
It's all.
It's all.
All
Okay.
permits, all registered. If you're not withdrawing, whatever the period we eventually decide on, I would prefer 30 years. But a 10-year review should be able to occur if they're not using it. And then you could also add the point, or if water quantity or water quality issues also support a 10-year review.
And again, yours is not specific to ground or surface water. It's covering both. Is that what you're
Yes.
suggesting?
So
Okay.
you're saying if over 30 years, you don't take at least 10% what you said you were gonna take out, we need to relocate.
No, I'm saying before 30 years. So a 30-year review period, you get your permit for ground and surface,
Yes, sir.
regardless of what kind of withdrawal you are. You have a 30-year permit, but if you're not withdrawing anything within, and remember, right now in the current law says 36 months or 3 years, but we're talking about a future potential law where all the withdrawals are pulled into this new group, right? So this is ag, this is registrants, this is grandfathered new. If you're not using your permit, then before 30 years comes up, it can be reviewed. So within 10 years, at the 10-year mark, within your 30-year period, you're not using anything, or to the DES's point, there's a water quality or quantity issue developing. We're not just going to tie ourselves for 30 years. We can review at 10 years if there's a reason to do it. But if there isn't a reason to do it, there's not a reason to threaten the loan or bond issuance. The point is the 30 years is because unless there's a reason to do so, you should be able to be granted that period for financial reasons.
So you're saying that every 10, when the 10 years is coming out of your 30, you're gonna get looked at.
if need be, if there's a reason to.
Now, how would anybody know if there was a reason to? Like, does a red flag go off when some water
A
comes?
cone of depression is developing, salinity intrusion, in any number of things. Or they're getting monthly, but annual reports of monthly withdrawals. And if it's like 9 years comes around and whoever they are haven't withdrawn anything, it might be time to ask them, are you about to? Or are you not going to? Because do we need to go another 20 years without any withdrawal? Maybe you want to reconsider your amount.
What work is that for all of you? Yeah, all the time.
Less than if it was 5 years.
So we already do them every 5 years for groundwater and right now, most of them are staggered so that we typically have one evaluation going on and one renewal period going on. But there is a year where we have 3 evaluations and 2 renewals, that's a little bit busy. But this year is actually the light year where we only have a renewal going on. There's no evaluation going on this year. So, I mean, it just depends on the year, but, to add an evaluation for water allocation every 10 years, I mean, let's just say we did this evaluation every 10 years. I mean, I don't, for my surface water folks, because right now they're not doing this and we get so few permit applications in for surface water. I would say that this isn't that big of a ask. This would just be another task for them to do. I might want one more person if we were doing.
But I think what we're saying here on the board is this would be applied to both groundwater and surface water.
Right, so for the groundwater side, it would not add, that we're already doing these every 5 years. So groundwater, that's giving them a lighter load, truthfully, because it's half the amount of reviews they're doing. But for surface water, I think this would definitely be feasible. Like I said, I may maybe want another sentence. Nothing too crazy.
Let's say we said, well, all withdrawals, 3 million or over, that would be a much higher lift from y'all, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, everyone's already at that 3 million threshold.
Yeah, all the.
But grandfathered ones, but that's one of our recommendations.
Like, if that
Maybe.
happens.
Yeah,
Well,
like that.
So currently, I guess do you mean, so everyone be reviewed on that 10-year? So, well, the other side of it is, so on the groundwater side, we review each area, like we have 6 half-use areas. So we're reviewing each of those individually. So we're only looking at a subsection. So looking at this, would you want this to be a statewide review of all surface water? Or would we do it basin by basin, like for instance, Santee Basin, would this be like a Santee Basin specific? And then we do Edisto
I
specific?
mean, I think it's by permit.
That's by-
So
that's by permit. So we would do this for each permit separately, because right now with groundwater, we're doing just an area review. And we include all of the permits and their use and, but we look at the aquifers as a whole across that region. So for surface water though, would we then do once a statewide assessment, or is this a basin by basin assessment? How is this being,
and that's a really good new point you're making is that,
I'm just trying to figure out.
I mean, what you could,
Look at this.
my point is, it should be 30 years for everybody, ground, surface,
Sure.
everybody.
Yeah.
But in your either capacity use for ground or in your basin or statewide for the state, if an issue is developing,
Sure.
then you should be able to meet with the 30-year permittees at a
Sure.
10-year
So-
interval.
Right,
If you
we
do.
want to do it in an interval basis.
Yeah,
In
but-
practice.
Right, in practice, like on the groundwater side, we're doing it at a set interval and it would make more sense, like, I'm just thinking about the way that we were to do groundwater. I would want to already say, okay, let's just do this every 10 years. And that way we can see as an issue starting to develop or, because how do we know to look for that issue, right? Are we just saying
We
like?
can't sit down every day and evaluate.
Right, that's
all
what
of our groundwater.
weather events.
Ding, 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 ding.
assessment. It's kind of, what would trigger this review? Like you say an issue, is that like a flooding issue that's happening in an area? Is that a drought that we had? And now we want to review, like, how did our users fare during that drought? And then that's a regional thing, right? So then where was this drought? Was this drought along the coast? Was this drought more in the PD? Was this drought upstate? I'm just trying to, what would trigger this review beyond just having it as a set interval every 10 years?
I mean, that would be more you guys'
That
question,
would be a
but
regulatory promulgation. Those details would be sorted out. And if policy was to combine the two programs and do a 30-year permit renewal, I think you would have to have some kind of reopener clause specifically in there
Yes.
Yeah.
to make sure that, we have the ability to
Yeah.
reset that permit.
Again, going back to the 5-year review.
Yeah, to make sure we're protecting the resource.
10 years.
We wouldn't want to just do a review and we would need to have the ability to reopen.
Right, and I do understand that, and just. So I guess what you were trying to say though is if there was a site that potentially had an issue, we would just review that specific permit.
Well, I mean, I guess from your point, you would be looking at areas, either capacity use for ground or a basin, at least on the surface, and then it would potentially impact
Right.
multiple people.
On their review, groundwater permit, right, we get an application from them and do review each application, even if it is just a straight up, I want the same amount as last time, I'm good to go, I don't need to reduce, I don't need to increase, I'm happy. We do review them all.
But I think what you're gonna run up against is regardless of what the periodicity is of the review, not everybody's coming up for review at the same time with a
Right,
basin.
and that's something like what the groundwater side. Because if you want to do this type of review, it helps to have everyone on the same cycle, whether that's basin wide or a region or something. Because like I said, like right now, we're renewing the PD area, so I have a group of like 6 counties, everyone's just getting renewed at the same time in that area. And that way, the evaluation is more regional, and then everyone in that area is being renewed right now. And that way, it's not as, we're not doing everyone in the coastal plain at the same time, it's not like an unknown who's getting, everyone has the same renewal date. Everyone has the same, like, need to turn in their application by August 1st or whatever it is. And then we get that time to, and that way it also helps the burden on staff. So I've got 6 people that do groundwater permitting. And I can have, I do have a main coordinator for an area, but then the permit applications are spread across everyone to review them.
So, I mean, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's the first time I've heard it, and it's a little bit different than what we're talking about, because we're just trying to amend the current law
Sure.
to some new periodicity that makes sense for all the different groups, surface and ground. But has your idea of a review time applicable across a region, a basin, whatever, been discussed in any DES to legislator or water SC feedback session yet? And what was?
Not combining surface and ground, there's been some discussion about, with the capacity use program going to more of a 10-year.
But I'm saying as far as like putting everybody in a certain area looked at the same time from the standpoint of.
For surface water,
I don't.
because capacity use is already there.
Right.
I mean, we're doing that in practice.
But for surface.
For surface water, yeah, we would have to look
I don't know if there's
regulatorily as to how
Yeah.
we carry that out in practice, what makes sense. If, everybody has a permit and we're reviewing that on some frequency, we would have to look at how that works in practice, yes. Just to say you may review every 10 years and you have a 30-year permit, that gives a lot of flexibility on both sides. So, I mean, you gotta have some process to it.
Yeah, and that would be the benefit of holding the permit review periodicity to 30 years, but having some kind of mechanism of
Right.
looking at, I mean, some people
Look
would
at it
argue
every
that's what the
10.
10-year state water planning cycle is, but
Maybe basin by basin, look at it
Yeah.
every 10 and then have a reopener clause. If there is reason to have concern or make some adjustments, that then the department has the ability to do that.
I like that. I don't know how you word it, but I like it.
But that, I think the concept is what you're trying to get at here in this room.
Right.
If policymakers implemented these recommendations, we would get to that in a promulgation of a regulation.
Yeah.
Those details.
Yeah, it almost feels like we're trying to rewrite the whole thing ourselves, where we just want to say, hey, you need to consider these things. If people aren't using it, then we need to do something and so.
What if we just said 30 years or sooner if there's an issue in the basin and that based off of DES's monitoring the system? I mean, we need your help on wording that, but let's make this general such that you think it's setting up the discussion for accomplishing something more along the lines of what you're proposing.
I think keeping it general at this stage as a recommendation seems appropriate.
So 30 years unless DES says something's a problem.
Combining the two for 30 years, I think, that could create some challenges. Probably pros and cons to both.
Again, as long as there's a review period
Sure.
and the department has the ability and the right by law to restrict the permit.
Right. It would be key if you were going to move the groundwater from 5 to 30. We certainly want to have a clear process in place to review that at a reasonable frequency and have the ability to create limitations on those capacity use areas
Do you believe,
within that 30-year timeframe.
do you believe 10 years is a good compromise?
I mean, I think it just in my time in the program and hearing discussions, it seems like 5 years is too frequent. I think 30 years is too long. Seems like 10. Like again, groundwater is very measurable. If you've seen a kind of depression develop, you're seeing the issue develop in an aquifer in a certain area, you won't be able to
You could actually.
limit new use so you can allow that aquifer to sustain itself or rebound.
It was one.
So I mean, 30 years,
Here, because they didn't pay enough.
you could create quite a problem in that timeframe.
Yeah, that's a career.
Yeah.
I mean, well, if that was the case, then the permitting regulatory agency needs to have their hands not tied to be able to make decisions during that permit cycle to correct anything that could be causing harm to the aquifer. Or,
Sure.
yeah.
And it's been successful
Yeah, so.
in this 5-year timeframe. But 5 years may be a little frequent.
But you wouldn't want to put anything if it was longer that the agency and the regulatory would have to be able to have.
And that's in the benefit of all users,
Push in there.
I agree.
Reduce permit to,
Why
as a
would,
resource.
why not apply that to surface water, just with like climate change and precipitation? Like, could you apply that same to surface water and look at a shorter surface water period too?
I think that would be met with much opposition
What, 5 years?
if you took surface water.
I took-
Surface water to 10.
Surface water to 10. Let's just not even say those words again.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't
No.
understand why you couldn't take all to 30, but have this review process at 10 years.
Like otherwise, like, if there's not like that reopener and the agency doesn't have the ability to change the permit.
It goes back to the
actual
financing
condition,
aspect.
Then, like, that's just a permit.
It goes back to the financing aspect of it, 10 versus 30.
I guess, but then you're financing on something that's not,
Guaranteed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if there's an issue, you should, and there should be a mechanism for revisiting the permit earlier. But that doesn't mean that the default is 10 years necessarily. There are two different processes, is what I'm hearing. There's no need to tie the two processes together. In fact, there seems to be reason not to, from the standpoint that they're really two different things. The permits only need to be altered at a shorter increment if there's a problem that has developed. And their review, like their
In
prompt to
groundwater.
review the system can be at whatever frequency makes sense. And it sounds like 10 years is, you would not want to not be reviewing at least every 10 years, the two different hydraulic situations.
I assume, okay, groundwater's on a 5-year cycle. We have a groundwater permit. I mean, you review it and if everything's hunky-dory, do you even change permits? I mean, isn't that what you're doing now? You only change permits if there's a reason to?
So let's say we do an evaluation and we don't find any issues. We say, the groundwater is stable, like I haven't seen it. We still require everyone to submit the renewal application. And we still have those discussions of, because a user may be butting up against their permit limit. They may be using, 99 million gallons a year on their 100. And we're like, we may want to think about getting an increase. you know, because we don't want you to come out of compliance. We'd rather you get that increase, you know, we'll have looked at that as part of our assessment of the permit. So we would talk to the applicant and work with them to get their public notice out. And if they want to increase their permit, we'd work with them, get their public notice out and make, you know, we wouldn't necessarily suggest that if we thought they were in an area of concern, but under this scenario where we have no issues. So we would work with them, get their public notice, wait that period, no comments, we would reissue your permit for an increased volume if able and the person needed it. Now, we may still go into those scenarios where someone is once again using like 30 million gallons a year on a 100 million gallon a year permit. We would have that discussion with them. We may reduce it to that 30 plus 20%. We may even, you know, if upon discussion, they say, you know, we've only had this permit or maybe they have had this permit for 10 years, but you know, they see growth or they're going to be acquiring more acreage or they're going to be growing different crops. We would keep that amount for that. We would just have that discussion with the applicant before, but we still like to get everyone's application and review them.
Yeah, so is the system really broken? I mean, it's working. You had a situation, unfortunately, with you guys that was related to an actual issue with the groundwater. And so, you know, it's working.
Yeah, I would say it's working and we've had some successes with it. So we've seen rebound in the area.
Or at least 10 years, but I would think we want to go for 3.
If we're combining the groups, it's going to be changed because you get 3 different numbers you're working with. So if you're combining ground service, new grandfathered and registered permits, those are all different numbers. So that's why we're hashing out this periodicity that makes sense for all. We're going to combine all, combine them into one number, unless you're going to have different criteria for the different groups.
I understand like how being more specific can be like helpful, but maybe for this one, since it's so kind of like complex, we should keep it just general in terms of just saying like review cycle for both groundwater and surface water permits should be evaluated for efficiency and reliability or something like that. Just highlighting that it is a problem that we're not going to solve it within the short period within this room.
What do y'all, you like the idea of making it a little more general, just saying that?
Just not have any periodicity in there.
Yeah, and I like that better. And then also saying if you're something to the effect of if you're not using it, if you don't even have the capacity to use it, then you need to be reviewed and looked at it.
Because they're taking up capacity that could be utilized in the future by somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. Right, we put some draft language for what you just suggested, Riley, which read it off again or tell me again.
The review periods for groundwater and surface water renewal should be evaluated.
The bullet above that, is that what you're trying to say?
That's just aligning both surface and groundwater. I mean, we can say the same thing in the same recommendation if you want, but.
I guess should be evaluated. For reasonableness. Does that make sense? Maybe we'll look at it. I mean, it's just to say like, basically that we have identified that some change needs to be made. Okay, and that's, yeah, so any suggestions?
Alan had some language about like taking into account investments and infrastructure, and so I don't, maybe that would, you know, if we're trying to say why we think it should be evaluated, that might be helpful to his point about why we think it needs to be considered. I forget what he said.
Would that be like?
Long-term planning.
Yeah.
Because remember, people don't start building until they have permit. And then you could potentially look at a 5 plus year capital building cycle, whether it be an industry like a paper mill or whether it be a municipality, it's maybe a plant expansion. And you get you get the permit, you get towards the end of your build, you're about ready to start doing water, and then, oh, we've reevaluated the resource. We're gonna have to come down on your permit a little bit. And that was the fear during the 2011 legislation, is that there needs to be some reassurance that whatever's handed out in permits and registrations is something you can kind of bank on. I think it's a real fear. It's why the numbers are being discussed.
Okay, so the bold part could be the actual recommendation, or keeping it more general. The non-bold part, which I just grabbed from one of Alan's other suggestions, could be kind of some support behind that, where he was looking to align them more. We could remove that or we could keep it, but how do you all feel about how it's written right now?
I mean, it's all pretty general still.
Yeah. Everybody comfortable with that?
Not comfortable with the long-term planning efforts, if some kind of mention of it's also due to making sure that it's the purpose aligned with like the biological, physical, and chemical integrity of the water resource.
Biological, okay.
Physical and chemical integrity.
I was struggling with the word chemical. It's just not something that typically used in this type of.
You look under the MIF definition.
Yeah, like what are they even-
I'll put
It sounded very well scripted straight from the legislation. Good job.
Okay. Thoughts? Everybody okay with it?
That we're not mentioning the 10 years anywhere. I mean, who better to reevaluate than a group of us and make a suggestion? Like, it just seems super vague, maybe because it's lunchtime
And yeah, it is super vague, but I think that just from the discussion and the amount of time we have, like, we're not gonna solve it. But we are trying to identify, like we have with others, that it is an issue.
Yeah. Let's keep it this way for now. We'll take a second look at it with fresh eyes, maybe at the next meeting. Does that make sense? But we won't spend much time on it.
I can green it, and as much as it isn't saying anything, it's like
Yeah, it doesn't say it's so.
hard not to get behind it.
Oh,
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything.
Check for that amount of money. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You know,
I would like to get Alan's review of it. He was the one that kind of suggested this in the first place. Just get his input, so. Okay, it's 11:30. Let's actually just break for lunch now. Try to do a
We're
quick
done
lunch.
with mine, right?
I'm sorry?
We're done with all my stuff.
Well,
I think we can be. Let's just skip it.
yeah, so we kind of covered, I mean, we kind of covered this one.
Yeah,
so
let's just
that's-
move on.
Yeah, we can move on from that.
If I may retract my
Yeah, did you want to talk
more
about this
specific,
one at all?
no. not really.
No, okay, so we're gonna skip that. So then we just get into some other ones we yellow bucketed. And I
We
think
already discussed it.
that discussion can go pretty quick. But why don't we break, get lunch?
we need to eat.
Sarah needs to eat.
Sarah needs a roll.
We've got you covered, Sarah. We've got more food than we can all eat today and tomorrow. So online folks, we're gonna try to start up again maybe in about 15 minutes. Let's say 20 minutes, about 10 till. In fact, we're gonna start talking while they're finishing their lunch. So if you can rejoin us in about 11:50, hopefully we'll start then. So we have box lunch. Okay.
So.
All right, we're gonna, excuse me, we're gonna start back up. We just have maybe 4 or 5 additional yellow bucket recommendations from the last meeting to consider. And let's see if we can come to consensus on these, or if we can't, we'll move on. The first one that's on the screen was one that the Saluda RBC recommended. I think I mentioned this before. There was a member that was very passionate about native tree canopy protection. I can't remember why we discussed and decided to move this to a yellow bucket for later consideration. Maybe it was just to get time to consider it and think about it and sleep on it. But what do you all think about this one? Do you want to move it forward for this basin, or do you think it doesn't necessarily apply since you're not really as much in the headwater areas? Although you do have streams that feed into the, to the Santee and Congaree. Any thoughts?
Okay, I have a question because maybe I just don't know.
Mhm.
When they're saying we should prioritize and incentivize nature, like, is somebody against trees? Like, what do you mean prioritize? Like not cut down trees, be careful not to offend trees, be careful to fertilize trees, like what would we be doing?
Just native canopy versus like maybe an ornamental tree. They're like flowering trees are often chosen for, like red. Yeah. So I think if they're just incentivizing, municipalities or whoever's in this basin to plant native trees and prioritize that. You know, or say it's an ornamental tree that might be in the basin.
And I think so that's one of the topics that Saluda RBC member was very passionate about, was native tree canopy protection. I think he's also just trying to emphasize the importance of riparian buffers and trees along streams and keeping them there. They had a separate recommendation on riparian buffers. This one doesn't specifically say it, but I think you could read between the lines and suggest that that's what he was getting at as well.
Well, we're in the coastal zone and we're about as regulated as one could possibly be. With buffers and that sort of thing, so
So it's already there.
I think it's a waste of our time.
Pretty large percentage of the shoreline in our basin is protected property anyway, between WMAs and the Wildlife Refuge and Congaree Swamp.
Good point.
I don't know that. I think including this will just dilute the impact of our other recommendations.
Yeah, I could see that. Y'all kind of agree?
Mhm.
Okay. Unless anyone objects, we're gonna cross that one out and move on. The next one, we've kind of already talked about it, because we do have some recommendations centered around MIF. This was the more general recommendation on MIF that the Saluda put forth because they really couldn't come to consensus on a more specific recommendation. But they were all comfortable in at least suggesting that the science behind MIF standards be reviewed. I feel like we've already kind of addressed this through the meeting discussion.
Well, I think my point earlier was that just, like moving from, like these meetings doesn't fully address the kind of issue at hand. That's just one piece of the puzzle. So I would feel comfortable keeping this and maybe, combining them to be like, such as the structure specific example.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah. Would y'all be comfortable keeping this language as some of the support?
Yeah, I like,
the one we have already?
I would green bucket this, but would prefer it stay separate.
You want to keep it separate?
I mean, they're they're same topic, but they're two different suggestions.
We could at least group them together, but keep them as separate
On the same
recommendations.
slide if you want to. I mean, they'll be in the same section, they'll be on the same topic, but. It's kind of like for Alan's, we broke it up into Alan's recommendation, the 2 or 3 bullets. So I don't think keeping separate bullets for different points necessarily detracts from it. And why do you want to bring them together? Let me ask you that.
Because to me, it's getting at the same thing. It's, what was the general for the changing, from mean to median is because it's the more scientifically accurate measure. And so this is an example of such.
So you're thinking this is the broad statement and then, or as an example, you cite the median part. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Jason,
If you'll do a green bucket
thank you,
on the
ma'am.
Bruce plate bullet, then I'll be all for it. If you'll green bucket it, I'll be all for grouping it. Thank you.
Okay, so
Do you want to include not just MIF, but, what are the other? Minimum in-stream flow. There were two other parameters.
Minimum level.
Oh,
Oh,
water
water level, and then,
well, and then MIF or safe yield.
and, yeah, didn't you want median for all of those parameters?
Yeah, but they're definitely different points.
Okay, so don't do that, don't file it like that.
Yeah. I mean, they're related, but it's all related.
They're in one little bucket in my tiny noggin.
all right, everyone comfortable with including this one?
Yep.
We'll combine it with the other one. Again, you'll have the opportunity to review how it's presented and the language behind it, make suggestions at that point when you see a draft of chapter 9. Okay. All right. There was one that several of the other RBCs proposed and reached consensus on. Sometimes they didn't reach consensus, or sometimes there was variations of the consensus, or at least how the recommendation was, but it had to do with changing the permitting process so that they, when they review a permit, they check for alignment with the river basin plan, so what you're writing, or alternatively, the state water plan, assuming that it's legislatively approved.
They do that anyway?
No.
No, they don't. And
Right.
so there's, the way we've written this, it's very general again. It's open to interpretation, but how do you assess alignment with the river basin plan or the state water plan?
Because you've got the legislation and regulation, which is binding legally, and the RBCs, which is not.
I got you.
And it's hard enough for the agency to stay within the bounds of the law and the regulation and using departmental means and methods. Tacking in a completely different and basin specific, so not uniform across the state, which getting those to align with the current law and the regulation, as we can see, is.
Just to change everything to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it just. I would ask DES.
Yeah, what do y'all think?
Yeah, I kind of came in a big conversation, but yeah, I mean, like Jason said, statute regulation are what we go by in our permitting processes to then bring in some consideration for this process into that. Well, one, you would have to change regulations to make that.
Right,
legal.
have to change law.
So, I
Would it be beneficial? Would it just be time consuming?
And like Jason was saying, what does it look like for us to consider?
right, you have recommendations in a plan based off of a, stakeholder process, recommending policy changes and technical and everything else, and there's nothing really binding there. So, yeah, I think it would be a very challenging thing.
It sounds like red bucket.
And if you have such unanimity from an RBC, that's what a 30-day public review or comment period is. Try to get unanimity and present within the 30-day public period, a public comment from the RBC, but it would be taken into consideration, and that's it. But I don't think you can get unanimity.
One thing the river basin plan has, which DES hasn't had at their disposal when they've been reviewing permits, is on the surface water side, these current and projected demand use surface water model runs. So we've looked at the basin as a whole, where we put in projected use or current use and run it to see, are there shortages? Are there areas where stream flow significantly drops below MIFs, or there could be ecological concerns? Are there long duration shortages, short duration shortages? That's kind of new information that DES normally wouldn't have when they're reviewing a permit. The big picture basin scale look at things. That, in my mind, that's really the only thing that might add some value. But again, there's difficulty in how they would review that, and whether that could be challenged, and is it current or not? A lot of questions would remain.
To me, this basically would be acting like the river basin plans are like a comprehensive plan for different environments. Like that's what it's essentially doing. It's just kind of making it sort of as like a guiding document. I see the benefit or potential with like legislative funding and requests for funding. Could help support those, like requests, especially since I know that we did have a number of, kind of money heavy, suggestions that, not gonna die on myself.
Okay. I'm not hearing a whole lot of support for it or necessarily consensus behind it. Do you want to move on?
Hopefully some of what we're recommending from a policy perspective means that this kind of gets indirectly addressed, right? I mean, I think it's better served that kind of reversing
Yeah,
how that's thought about
okay,
than sticking with this.
okay. We talked a little bit last time, about high industrial water users that purchase from municipal supply, and Riley's provided some draft language for the RBC to consider, which says that high industrial water users purchasing from a supply should report monthly water usage to SCDES, aligning with what's already required for the actual withdrawal.
Didn't that meet with some resistance? Seems like we talked about it. There was, a high water user that didn't want anybody to know how much they were using.
Yeah.
So that would go against that.
And Riley, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I think the point was that there's just a desire to know who those high water users are and make it more publicly accessible information. So I don't know. What do y'all think?
I mean, one concern I have, because I know how it usually ends up happening, is the onus gets put on the utilities.
Yeah.
And I think if we're gonna have this provision in here, we stick with and emphasize that if the law is gonna change, it's gonna be up to the law is gonna require the users to report their use, the industries, not that this new onerous requirement of the utility to go through the utility to go through all their various industries and report all, like, it would be onerous on the reporting side for especially a smaller utility. Yeah, I would argue a big one too, to go through all their different utilities.
So you go through a FOIA request and then charge them $500 an hour for your FOIA.
Contractual perspective, that'd get super messy too.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be, and it's worded well. Right now, the way it's worded, it's on the industry to report that usage to DES.
Yeah, 'cause I'm thinking about that too. I don't want the burden to be on like the water utility. I think it should be on the water user.
Okay. How do you define high industrial water use? What's the?
What if we did 3 MGM? 3 million gallons a month, because that's
That'd be consistent with the other
the criteria
regs.
used all throughout the law for withdrawal. That would be the use requirement. As a compromise, some people want more, some people want less.
That would be consistent with everything else we're doing. So in their high water users, in parentheses, 3 MGM. After users. There. There you go.
Million gallons a month for anybody curious.
With that,
Everyone comfortable with it?
I didn't include, because I thought about that too, and I didn't include it because I just wanted to leave some kind of deference to like the agency.
right,
Because it's like if it could be like the same sector, but if it's like.
I know.
So that's why it's like kind of like more related to almost, it could be like maybe like the sector of, and like the grouping of water users. So, I would rather delete it just to leave some deference to the agency, and again, leaving it general just to identify this as a problem of, industrial users purchasing from municipal supply, and that isn't kind of publicly and transparent.
It's gonna be a lot of reports for DES to receive. I mean, 3 MGM is a super low threshold in the scheme of water quantity use. Think 3 MGM, we're not talking about 3 million gallons a day, 3 MGM a month. So, any industry of any size really is gonna be reporting. I mean, maybe not a car wash, but you know, like any industry would be. What's your, you want it to catch all?
No, not at all. If we believe that, then that gives some deference to like the agency.
Yeah, but, okay, I'm gonna play devil's advocate there. You know, somebody may be fishing for one industry, you know, how much are they using? There needs to be some sort of a demarcation where some of that's protected. If you leave it up to the agencies, the agency may say, well, unless you're using 1 million gallons a day, we're not gonna report it. Or that's on one end, or we're gonna report it if it's 1 million gallons a month, which is the other end of the spectrum. So
Let me ask the agency, DES, where did the 3 MGM come from? Like what's some of the reasons behind setting an arbitrary 3 MGM?
I think Georgia uses 100,000 a day. That's even more, I would say that's a little bit stricter because ours is 3 million in a whole month. So you could use greater than 100,000 in a day. You know, but if you're only using 3 million for less than 3 million a month, then you don't need to register your permit. But in other states, it's just kind of a similar volume. The region.
it goes back to why are train tracks a certain width apart? Because that's the width of Roman chariot wheels. That's what it goes back to. You know, you gotta go way back to figure out where it came from.
I hope it's a Jeopardy question.
Yeah, that's a transportation class question and a final exam.
But no pun intended, no reinventing the wheel there.
Oh, nice
So
pun.
we're not gonna reinvent the wheel, we're just gonna do what other states do. I mean, it's an.
Well, and it's more importantly, it's what our state does. So it's not an arbitrary number we're just pulling out of the hat. I mean, there is a
Making it
precedent.
consistent.
There's a precedent and it would make it more consistent. And if we put nothing, it can always change. People can always push for it to be lower or higher, but
Right, and anything we also put forward in here is not gonna actually be fun.
Yeah.
You know, like law, like there's gonna be so many discussions, so many other, probably 3 other stakeholder groups just for this, that like these additional recommendations, and so, you know, it's just like, again, trying to keep it general, knowing that we're not gonna get other issues.
so is 3 MGM in here going to prevent you from green bucketing it?
I just don't think it's helpful, you know, because then also, you know, I think of, well, what if, you know, this industry, like it can create confusion for an industry that's maybe 1 month is using 3, you know, like MGM, and then the next month, maybe they don't have like the same demand. So then are they required to do it, you know, each month, even because they did it for that 1 month? You know what I mean?
I think they're averaging the months in a year.
Well, no. The way our permits work is it's 3 million in any given month, like it's specific. So if you use 3 1 month and 2 the next, you still need a permit. So let me just be any month. It's any given month. So that's why with ag, even though you're using your amount only over 4 months, if you average it over the year, no, you're not using 3 million a month.
Right,
But you still need to get a permit of registration.
which is why the 5% seems harmless, but it really is something to consider.
Online, let's see. John says, I always think in terms of cubic feet per second as relates to stream flow. 3 million gallons per month is about 0.15 cubic feet per second, which seems quite low.
Yeah, but he's not treating that in CFS. They're treating it in a water treatment plant. See, they're buying treated water.
Yeah, I mean, we can come up with number. I think it's a good idea to have the 3 MGM, but the reality is it's the withdrawal law regulation. There's not necessarily an ability for them to regulate use per se,
Right.
because it's not a withdrawal. So that's the fear, is this is going to come back on the withdrawer, which is the water utilities, to do what is being recommended to do, because there's not a mechanism within the law.
Charleston Water provides more than 3 million gallons per month to.
All
Mount
industries.
Pleasant. No, I'm thinking to, that you provide to like Mount Pleasant, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're not an industry, they're a wholesale, they
No, I know.
are a type of wholesale, but yeah, I mean.
Trying to
I
make
think
the
point, though, that-
I think up to 6 MGM,
6
or MGD, my bad.
I mean, Riley, you're just interested in industrial water users. There's a lot of instances where water utilities purchase from other water utilities.
Yeah.
You don't want them to report.
No, I think it's more about like kind of getting a full snapshot on the industrial users. Such as like data centers that are buying a lot of water, and that information isn't publicly available, and that industry is growing and growing and growing, and there's no public transparency. So I think it's really getting at that point.
I think in the one instance where this happened, I think they claimed, well, that's company confidential information. We don't want to have to divulge how we use the water or the process that we use the water.
But there'd have to be a law on the books requiring that reporting.
Yeah.
Are we good with 3 MGM?
I am, because it's consistent.
Okay. Riley, are you keeping it in, or?
I mean, if that's gonna get a green bucket, then sure, I'd rather keep it general, but
Okay. We'll keep it in unless you hear any opposition. No. Okay. Okay. Green that guy. All right. Last one we've already kind of covered. This was a Saluda recommendation, but we've already talked about safe yield. I don't think we need to reevaluate this one, so we're gonna move on. So everybody comfortable with the policy, regulatory, legislative recommendations? Again, you'll have the opportunity to revisit all of these when we write it up in chapter 9. We've got a couple yellow, green bucket ones we're gonna sleep on and talk about them just for a short amount of time at our next meeting, but otherwise no other recommendations anyone wants to propose related to this topic. We still have to do technical recommendations, but we're not going to do those until we've finished the water availability modeling assessment and talked about water management strategies. But that discussion should go pretty quick, I think. All right, well, let's move on then. Okay, before I get into water management strategies, I want to give you a quick update on where we stand on the surface water modeling. We've been updating the model. We're very close to doing our current use scenario run. In the meantime, I've requested but still haven't received the demand projections so that we can do our moderate and high demand scenarios. So I'm waiting on that information. Hopefully I get it in the next week or two, and right about the time we finished our current use scenario, we'll do those other 2 scenarios. And I'm still hoping and planning on August, at our August 12th meeting, that we present all the surface water modeling results. Michael, I think I mentioned to you, I do want to try to get on the phone with you and Scott, folks from his team, and just do a quick review of the current use scenario once we've run it, make sure that we've got all the assumptions in and releases and drought stuff appropriately conditioned in the model. I'll try to set that up probably for next week. So I mentioned all that because we're jumping the gun a little bit on this topic. Usually we do this water management strategy discussion after we've already digested the results of the surface water modeling. Again, we're not doing any groundwater modeling, but the presentation I'm going to give you today is very general. It's going to get you starting to think about water management strategies so that once you see the surface water model results, you'll have you have the ability to more quickly come to some consensus on what strategies you want to recommend. Now, I'll preface that with, I don't expect we're going to see gaps or shortages when we run the model, even for our 2070 high demand projection scenario. I'm not expecting that. Now, could be surprised, but I'm not expecting we're going to see gaps. And that's been similar in several of the other basins. We didn't see gaps when we did that high demand 2070 projection. But that doesn't mean that we didn't still go ahead and identify water management strategies that we think would increase the flow or maintain flow as we grow through time and more water is being used. And that's what we're going to focus on, is those demand side strategies that are like water efficiency and water loss control, And that's where the other RBCs have spent a lot of their time. They haven't been really as focused on the supply side, any new reservoirs, because there hasn't been a need right now, even looking 50 years into the future. There haven't been shortages to alleviate. So we really haven't decided that we needed supply side strategies. So we're going to focus on the demand side strategies. I just want to review some of these planning framework definitions before we get into this discussion. So the first one is what is a surface water management strategy? So it's any strategy that's proposed to eliminate surface water shortage, reduce a shortage, or generally increase surface water. And again, based on what I just said, we're going to focus on strategies that just increase surface water because I don't think there's going to be shortages. We'll find out next month, but think about strategies that increase surface water availability. On the groundwater side, they are strategies proposed to address a groundwater area of concern or a groundwater shortage. We're not doing any modeling, so we're not identifying groundwater shortages. And based on what we've heard from Brooke, we did not really identify any groundwater areas of concern in this basin, right? Right. Okay. But again, that doesn't mean that there aren't strategies that we should recommend that help preserve aquifer levels and use the resource wisely. That was the groundwater area concern definition, but we didn't identify one, so we're going to move on. Okay, so I've already mentioned demand side and supply side. Does everyone understand kind of the difference, what demand side strategies are versus supply side? Anybody not understand what the difference is here? Okay. The approach we've been taking is kind of identifying a portfolio of strategies in all the basins. So not just one, what makes sense. And we've heard a lot of discussion from all the different various RBC members representing different sectors that we need a portfolio. Even amongst water utilities, not one strategy applies to all of them. Amongst farmers, they grow different types of crops, so not one strategy applies to all farmers. You kind of have to pick and choose. That's why we've been focusing on a portfolio of strategies. That's what we'll do here in this basin. So some examples, starting with municipal demand side strategies. Examples are like water loss control programs, low flow fixtures, toilets and appliances. We've already talked about pricing structures during our drought discussion, like increasing block rates to disincentivize high water use. Recycled water programs, you kind of consider those both demand and supply side, right? They help lower demand, but they also provide a new supply. We'll talk about those. And then public education. Those are kind of the top example practices that have come up in discussions again and again in the other RBCs. On the ag side, hopefully you had a chance to review that article that was just published in the journal of Science Water. It's kind of a nice high-level overview of ag management strategies. Many of them are ones that we've heard about in other river basin councils, and we know they're already in use. Things like water audits, center pivot sprinkler retrofits, soil moisture sensors, soil management, which includes cover cropping, conservation tillage. Crop selection is very important. There's been a lot of good discussion in other RBCs that crop selection isn't really water driven, it's more market driven. And farmers have to make decisions on what to grow based on income and revenue, not necessarily on.
You don't see much tobacco being raised anymore, do you?
I'm sorry?
You don't see near as much tobacco being raised anymore, do you?
Right, yeah. Irrigation scheduling is one. High efficiency or precision irrigation is another for select crop types. So those are just a handful of the demand side practices for ag. Then we get into industrial and thermoelectric, and many of these practices are very similar to municipal practices. Water reuse and recycling, or recycled water programs, efficient processes, certainly water loss control, so fixing leaky pipes, low flow toilets, fixtures, appliances. Same thing with thermoelectric. There's been a switch to combined cycle natural gas at several plants in North or South Carolina in the past decade or so. Those use less water. Todd, I left off golf courses, but there are strategies that golf courses use. Wetting agents are one. Wetting agents, explain what wetting agents do.
Wetting agents break down the resistance of the soil to hold water. So when you have hydrophobic situations, a wetting agent will allow that soil to retain the water for the plant a little bit better. So we don't use as much water doing that. Height of cut's another one you can do.
Say that
Change
again?
the height of cut.
Oh, height of cut.
Yeah, it changes a lot.
Okay, good. Okay, and then on the supply side, which, I don't think we're gonna need to recommend any supply side strategies, but, obviously increasing storage, so new impoundments or dredging to increase the available storage in an impoundment. Expanding the reservoir, so raising the dam height gives you more storage. Aquifer storage and recovery, so creating an underground reservoir of water to meet peak demands is common in the coastal area. Water reclamation or recycled water programs, that's becoming more and more used, especially along the coast because of issues with being able to discharge water, which drives you more towards using that water so you don't have to discharge it, getting discharge permits in the coastal areas. Conjunctive use is a supply side strategy. That is basically using groundwater to augment surface water during low flow periods or kind of the opposite, using surface water as a backup to groundwater. And we've got several examples of different sectors that use conjunctive use already. Conveyance is a strategy. Regional water systems. So the Santee regional water system is an example of that. And that involves also an interbasin transfer. So one example is the Lake Marion regional water system has an emergency connection with Orangeburg. They can provide up to a couple million gallons a day, I think, to Orangeburg on an emergency basis, I believe.
Possibly.
Yeah. Which is an interbasin transfer to the Edisto, made possible through conveyance. So that's also a strategy. Utility interconnections is a strategy. That's kind of a strategy as a contingency, especially in the upstate. If you don't have ability to use groundwater as a contingency, you might just need to connect to your next neighbor as backup. So,
All Grand Strand utilities are interconnected.
all right, so that's a list of kind of broad portfolio of different strategies. I just want to touch on a couple examples to show you some of the effectiveness of those strategies where possible. Jason, I apologize. You've kind of heard some of these examples already in the Edisto, but there's one where I live. The town of Cary is actually they're a lot bigger than 175,000 now, but they're right next to Raleigh, and they've had a very strong water efficiency, water conservation program for the last couple of decades. So beginning in 1999, they started with a 3-tiered water rate structure to disincentivize heavy water use. They implemented landscape and irrigation codes. They started giving out rebates for toilet flappers and other high efficiency appliances. They've done residential water audits. They put in a new construction points program for water efficiency measures. They do these monthly water budgets for their largest irrigators. A lot of public education. And they were the first in North Carolina to do a reclaimed water program, a recycled water program. So they were pretty proactive, going back more than 2 decades. And what they've seen happen is their per capita rate has dropped from about 114 gallons per capita per day to 81 in 2016. And I think it's even lower now. So they saw a reduction in per capita demand. Now, it's hard to distinguish if that's just a passive reduction because of new construction and new higher efficiency appliances going in, or if it's just a result of all these different measures that they put in place to lower water use. That's something that could be debated. I've had debates like that in other RBCs, and Greenville is one example. They've also seen a decline of 95 gallons per capita a day to about 68, so a 28% decrease. And when I talked to Jeff Boss and Jeff Phillips, who are part of the Upper Savannah and Saluda RBCs, they'll say that, you know what, we didn't really have all those strategies in place that we just talked about with the town of Cary. You know, they do some public education, they push for water efficiency measures, but it really wasn't a concentrated program where they're trying to do these things and they're trying to incentivize stuff. They said their drop is primarily just from more multifamily and you know, the type of housing that's been built. There's not as much development of, you know, 1 acre lots where you're doing a lot of irrigation. It's more dense housing. And that's really what's driving their decline in per capita demand. So again, it's hard to distinguish, you know, have these water efficiency measures really had a strong effect, or how is it just because of passive changes that have happened over time? The city of Atlanta is the third example. They were around 150 gallons per capita per day in 2000, and they've dropped that to about 99 gallons per capita a day. So they've increased their population by 1 million, and at the same time, they've decreased their total demand by 10%. Which is pretty impressive, but they had some significant struggles, you know, don't have enough water, and they kind of had to do this, but they implemented conservation pricing structures. They did toilet rebates, landscape irrigation programs, a lot of the same stuff that the town of Cary did, which I'm sure was effective in getting them down to, you know, 99 gallons per capita a day. But again, a lot of that probably just came from passive type of activities.
Can you explain how a car wash recycling ordinance works? I've never seen more car washes than I have in Somerville and the Low Country.
So
Oh, they're money laundering.
Yeah.
My son was like, well, they had, is it Tom's is the big new one, and apparently they have that in upstate New York. Anyway, I was just curious.
so it would require, it's an ordinance that requires any new car wash business to recycle either all or a percent of their water. And there's examples we could provide, but in more water stressed areas like out west, these are common. They're not common here on the East Coast, and I don't know that there's any in South Carolina, but in more water stressed areas, they'll require 50%, 80%, sometimes 100% of car washes to recycle water.
So the water goes through and out of the car wash, and they've got some mechanism for capturing it, cleaning it in.
Exactly. Yep.
It's a filtration, very, very complex filtration system.
Expensive.
Very.
Yeah, it just makes the cost of your car washing
Double.
expensive, but
Wow. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
so that's just, you know, a big picture of different water conservation strategies that have been implemented in Georgia, North Carolina. Okay, water loss programs, water control, water efficiency, water loss programs. Here's a quiz question. How many gallons of drinking water are estimated to be lost each year in the US to faulty, aging, and leaking pipes? Any idea?
I bet C.
Or 70 billion gallons? Anybody else have a guess? Always picks, yeah. It's 1.7 trillion gallons. Which, I don't know. You think at the scale of the US and for a year, it's hard to decide, is that a lot or not? I don't know. It is a big number.
Anytime you get into a trillion, that is a lot.
Yeah.
Even,
Your groundwater recharge program.
Yeah.
there you go.
So to put that, I guess, in a little better perspective, the state of Georgia has been doing they've had a Georgia Water Stewardship Act since 2010. So they require water utilities that serve more than 3,300 people, which is about 250 utilities, to do annual water lot audits using this AWWA N36 method. They have to implement a water loss control program. They have to meet or develop individual goals and then demonstrate progress toward improving their water supply efficiency. This is just a histogram of where the 250 or 263 Georgia utilities stand on the percent of water loss. So you can see the 56 bar there in the middle. That's where the majority of them are, which is about 10 to 15% of water loss. What's eye-opening to me is that there's some utilities that lose more than 35%.
Somebody went out there 65 to 70, you must have some hydrants open, so.
It's probably rural water utilities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are a surprising number that lose, more than a third to a half or more of the water that they're withdrawing.
It's a double jeopardy if they're also in the sewer business, because they're probably collecting a lot of that through inflow and infiltration. So they're treating it going out, and treating it coming back.
That could be the case.
They're not being paid for it either way, so.
That's true.
This, just for the point, it's in every water utility's best interest to charge for every drop they treat. So any water lost, you're not charging for, so it's lost revenue. So utilities are incentivized to lower this number a lot, but I think you would probably, as you get a strapped more rural water utility with manpower issues, lower ratepayer base, aging infrastructure, you probably move yourself further to the right, unfortunately.
A lot of leaks, a lot of breaks that go unnoticed.
Say that again.
So a lot of leaks and a lot of breaks go unnoticed in those rural areas.
Yeah,
Right.
the first notice is a road caving in.
So to address that, some of the other RBCs have made recommendations about AMI and AMR, so automatic meter programs, so you can better identify where those leaks are and more quickly, finer scale. But that's expensive too.
The state of the art in water network modeling has dramatically improved in the last 10 years from the old Kentucky pipe model. Now you can, if you isolate part of a system, you can figure out where your losses are coming from.
Every 2 years, DES does a comprehensive survey of the water utility called a sanitary survey. And it's included on it that you do a water loss audit. So we have to report that every 2 years when they come on site. And then they also want to know that you have a leak and detection program. So they do have some regulatory methodology to keep utilities in line, to make sure they have something in place to do that.
Soil types, if you get into the Piedmont and the upstate, it's a lot easier to detect than it is on the coast because of the soil type and a relatively high groundwater table. So it just disappears into the groundwater and you can't, it's almost impossible to detect it.
They've been experimenting with, remote sensing, but airplanes that fly and do imaging to try to identify leaks. So Greenville Water tried it, and there's a few other upstate utilities that have tried that approach to varying.
Using infrared.
I don't know if it's infrared or something.
Probably just looking for green grass similar to septic system leaks. Who's got the greenest backyard? They probably got a bad septic system, right?
Or one that's very effective.
In some instances, it's been useful. In others, they've kind of seen mixed results or false positives, I guess. So,
I think so.
but that is kind of a new way to identify leaks. It's been tested. You brought up the sanitary surveys, though. If a utility does a survey here in South Carolina and they find that they're losing 40% of their water, it's just impinged upon them to find those leaks and fix it, though, right?
Yeah, they might get an unsatisfactory rating and say, we expect to see something, either different in the next survey, or they might require them to put some things in place. I'm not sure. I mean, there's nothing in a permit or anything that says you have to have 90% or, so I'm not sure how much teeth they have to do but it is, in the survey, and documented that,
But if you're losing the water, then you're not charging for it.
right.
So it's a financial loss on utilities parts that they would probably want to.
Right.
And, it's not just how much water you've billed for, but like if we empty a tank to do a rehab of the tank, then we're gonna account for that. Or if the fire department's doing its surveys on the fire hydrants, doing fire flow testing, they'll record that. And so we're getting the data. If we've got to do a flushing program or something, we collect all that so that we can add that to what we've sold, and we can, account for it so that it doesn't look like we have 80% when it's really 90 or something like that.
Any of the water utilities care to share what their latest audit results were, or percentage?
If you go back to the AWWA standard page, so one benefit of the new AWWA standard is you notice it says real losses. And it's this idea that, you know, before it was like unaccounted for water, but now we call it non-revenue water. And so, for example, we may allow in a construction site or a firefighting entity to flush hydrants. We're not requiring them to stick a meter to flush every single hydrant. So it's going to be water which is unquantifiable. And so through the new AWWA standard, you're trying to bend the different types of water use, not just into two categories, what we got paid for and everything else, but in that lump that we're not getting paid for, how much of that can be explained through firefighters, flushing systems and construction activities and such like that. And so in the case of Charleston Water System, thank you. In the case of Charleston Water System, we've completed this across our utility, but we've got 1,800 miles of pipes. So it was not a light endeavor. We contracted out with a consultant to help out, but it was to our benefit because every drop we can account for and get paid for, more revenue. But we found that, you know, when you looked at the bigger bin, the non-revenue water at the bottom right, it was like, and I'm going off recollection, and I think I gave this number in the Edisto RBC, it was around 13%. And whenever we did this audit, and we're able to look at all the different types of dark bins here to the bottom right, the real losses were closer to like 9%. And so, you know, obviously 0 would be the target, but you got to ask yourself how much manpower and resources you're devoting to get, you get diminishing returns.
Yeah,
The
level
goal
of
is
service A, B, C, or D.
Yeah.
D is a lot cheaper than A.
Yeah, the goal is to get as low as possible, and we feel like we're at a pretty good spot. We're still obviously wanting to get lower in the single digits, but it was good information for us to know how much of that 13% was other than real losses. They call it apparent losses here. It's all about the semantics. But the new AWWA standard is a good one, but I can tell you that with smaller, large utilities aside, you know, are both going to struggle to implement this new standard just because it does take resources to do it. But I think it's a good thing.
With the rapid expanse of development along the coast, every time you extend a water line, every time you hook up a new apartment complex, every time you build a connection to another utility, everything that gets built has to be flushed, usually multiple times to get all the sediment out of it. And that's a tremendous amount of water right there.
It is.
So one example of where there's been a consolidated basin-wide effort to tackle water loss is the Catawba Basin. So, you know, both North and South Carolina, as managed by the Catawba Water Management Group. More than 10 years ago, they put together a 7+ phase process where they intended to reduce their overall water loss. So they did a water balance and they did these M36 water audits. They looked at what type of water they're losing, did the profiling, how much uncertainty was, a lot of technical analysis, and then they did an economic analysis. Figure out, you know, what's the cost of what we're losing, how much should be repairing, and where's the balance. That's got into the cost effectiveness part, which is, I think, kind of where they are now, trying to intervene and fix these losses, account for it in their rates, do revenue projections that account for it. They did some estimates basin-wide of how much water is being lost. And it's 17 billion gallons, which is a lot. Charlotte Water itself was almost half of that, 8.2 billion gallons. But they've got a huge system, obviously. But they put an economic value to that of 23 million for 2021. So again, basin-wide, that's a pretty big number. Okay, just a couple other examples. I actually mentioned this one earlier. This is City of Orangeburg. They have multiple water management strategies. One is they've got 2 aquifer storage and recovery wells, which is kind of both a demand and supply side strategy to help meet peak demands and store that water to meet peak demands. They have an interconnection that they don't typically use, but if they need to, if the North Fork Edisto River is running really low and they can't use their wells, they can purchase water from Lake Marion Regional Water System and do an interbasin transport. and it's either 1 or 2 MGD. I can't remember that they can bring over. So they've got some resiliency through those groundwater ASR wells, their withdrawal from the North Fork, and then purchasing water from an adjoining basin. On the ag side, one of the first RBC field trips that we ever took was to Walter Farms in the Edisto Basin. They do a lot of strategies. On the supply side, they put in groundwater wells so they can meet 20% of their peak demands from groundwater. They don't like to, they'd rather use surface water because it's cheaper and they like the quality of it better. But if they need to, they can do 20% of their demands from groundwater. And I think since the Edisto RBC met, they've actually expanded that capability to make it higher than 20%. On the demand side, they've done water audits, sprinkler head retrofits and they've eliminated the end spray guns. You see those are quite common where they're at the end of the unit and it sprays out over the air. They feel like you lose a lot to evaporation because of that, so they don't even bother. They prefer those low nozzles that are very close to the crop that they're trying to irrigate. There's a less loss of water. They do something called dammer dikers when they grow potatoes. So it's something that comes in and creates a little puddle, kind of a mound and a depression in the sand, so that when they apply the water, it goes right to the roots and it doesn't run off. So it focuses the water on the root system. They do cover cropping, a lot of soil management. So when they're not growing crops in the winter, they're putting down rye or something else to maintain the carbon, maintain moisture levels. So a lot of different things that they do. Did I miss anything that you remember Jeremy doing?
I just remember it was a really good operation. Jeremy went through a lot of these different, strategies that they have, we call them best management practices. But I mean, not only could he talk authoritatively to them, he could show us how they've implemented it. And he's also been an advocate for working on Clemson funding and stuff to help other agricultural users do it too. So I thought it was a really good field trip.
Brandon's stuff still on there? Yeah, okay, well, Brandon's with Dominion and the Edisto. Dominion has the Cope Station. They're a good example of conjunctive use. Through agreement with DES, they've basically had the ability to meet all of their demands from either groundwater or surface water. They were on groundwater. They're moving to a combination of surface and groundwater. Eventually, they're going to be pulling 90% from surface water, but they have the ability to switch back if flows in the Edisto are low enough. So they're a good example of contingency. Basically, they can go back and forth to either source as needed. I mentioned this earlier. Brad O'Neill with Coosaw Farms is in the lower Savannah, Salkehatchie. He, like Walter Farms, does a lot of agricultural strategies to minimize how much water they use, capture excess water that runs off through a series of ditches, reservoirs, and pumps, more effectively apply it using microemitters, which is that picture on the right. So it's kind of a high precision type of irrigation system that you're applying it directly to the soil and only the amount that you need in low volume. They use soil moisture sensors, so they're not overwatering and wasting water, and they can apply water when they need it. So it's a pretty impressive operation. And I wish I could say whether like him and Jeremy are typical. I don't really know whether they're typical operations or not. I want to say that they're probably more on the progressive is the right word, but they probably do more than typical strategies than most farmers, just because they have more well-funded operations. But, okay, that's a really quick run through of just examples of water management strategies. What we usually do at this point, and we're not going to do it today because we're running out of time, is we kind of break out into small groups. And I had sent a group discussion guide. We may reserve that for our next meeting, but in the few minutes that we have left, it might be worth just a short discussion of what you think is applicable in this basin. or what's already in use that you think can be expanded? Those type of questions. Any thoughts? What? Jason, maybe I'll start with you. What does Charleston Water already do to encourage efficient use of water?
So, I mean, others could speak more authoritatively to it, but a lot of the low head fixture regulations, which there's been some backsliding in those lately, but I mean, there was a lot of regulations around low head fixtures and toilets and all that, that really did help with water usage over the past few decades that people bought, whether they realized it or not, because that's what was available at their local hardware store. But we've seen a relatively level demand considering growth. Like our demand growth has not been proportional to population, which we think is partly reflective of the low head fixture laws in the past. So we think those were good. We've implemented the new AWWA water loss standard, which not only helped us to do an updated study, but it allowed us to change some of the ways our departments operate and account for and report water. We have AMR, but we're also working towards AMI, not everywhere, but more, smart meters that are able to better understand when customers have issues on their property, past the meter. And then we have a lot of telemetry within our distribution, or, like I said, 1,800 miles of pipe, some million feet of pipe. And we have a lot of pressure sensors and such, and flow sensors and pressure sensors, at least to every wholesale connection, but really we've got them throughout the distribution system. When there's a leak, we know it. It's a substantial leak for sure, but because we're not that rural, a lot of our leaks are detected earlier because somebody notices their yard's wet or downtown has, an issue. But and then one other thing I can speak to is we've at least explored ASR. We did do a pilot well project where we looked at production capabilities at a shallower aquifer. We've decided not to do ASR for now, but it's not a never for ASR. It just doesn't make sense right now. But it shows that we're willing to explore that. And the good thing is DNR, our DES is getting a new monitoring well potentially. We're open to exploring ASR and other unique technologies in the future. But then I would just say the way that we've got our contingency and drought plan and are able to shift water between our three intakes, Bushy Park, Edisto, and Goose Creek Reservoir, two different reservoirs, and we've got that system very well, a lot of new telemetry within that system, flow and level sensors. We're just able to really manage the system very closely, and we're able to do changes very quickly within hours, not days. So I think just having a drought or contingency plan that, has realistic measures to adapt to drought and other emergencies is really critical. I'd encourage everybody to do that.
John, I just want to mention, John Grego online said, absent agricultural input on this committee, should we be in touch with our county soil and water conservation district contacts for insight on some of these recommendations?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yep, thanks, John. Tony, what about Mount Pleasant? Kind of same list that you heard from Jason?
Pretty much. I mean, we have a very robust AMI system. And those guys know about where every drop goes. Same thing they're trying to implement. We have got, it comes back, they can let customers know when they have a leak right away, just about, there's a continuous use.
Since you've put that AMI system in, have you seen a drop in water loss? Or is it not that?
I would say
easy to tell?
yes. I'm not, particularly tuned into that. That'd be more of a Ross question, but I would say so. I mean, because usually I'll get a spreadsheet every 2 weeks of what the AMI data was, and then I can compare it to production, because I know how much water we put out in the system, and we can kind of see where the discrepancies are. They keep track of all the flushing. We have a good water quality group that keeps track of, flushing for new projects or just flushing to keep residuals up, and also the fire department. We do utilize ASRs. We have a third one drilled. It should be operational next summer. We're also pretty robust, where we got groundwater, plus we have pressure surface water as well. And I mean, we try best practices for sure.
Yeah, education too, we have a chief water conservation position
Yep.
that do work with the community education as well.
Oh, okay. They also work with the AMI department too, so if the AMI comes back, hey, this guy's got continuous use, using a lot of water, that conservation guy will go out and talk, you know, hey, you might have a leaky flapper or something, you know, they'll go out and inspect and try to see what the issues are.
So is that something I've always wondered, is that typical of utilities to have multiple, or at least even one water conservation position? I haven't really
No.
heard others speak about that, like for Somerville, it's,
Oh, no.
no. Or not Somerville.
Flush twice is our motto.
Well, that's taxpayer money about flush too.
So, well, you bring up flush twice. I mean, so that's part of the problem is when you reduce demand, you're also reducing your money coming into the utility, which then makes it harder to fix leaks and do infrastructure repair, do other things that you need to do to provide water. So there's a balancing act between lowering demands, but also maintaining your financial capabilities.
There is, but the reality is, if you have that big of a conservation in use, your rate structure will change to account for that. So let's say we have a 10% reduction because some law limited fixtures to 10% their use, and we started to feel that, we would increase our rates. The person's still going to be filling $100 bill, but maybe using 10% less water than they used to. But I mean, it's not that rates are fixed forever. Rates change based off of the reality of we have to bring in enough revenue to exist. So
Keep things going.
yeah, rates are fluid. They cover bond cycles, capital expansion, and O&M operation costs.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to have to replace the pipes in our ground because everybody's using so much water that we need bigger pipes to meet the demand. So we don't want to really encourage people to flush twice, but.
She was being facetious, is what she
I
said.
was, but yeah. We have, with the automatic meters, we generate a list, of people who've, had a significant increase in their usage to let them know they may have a leak. We've got leak detection in our monitoring systems. We have what's called a SCADA system telemetry, where if the pressure drops, let's say 5 PSI in within a minute, then we'll get a call immediately that says something happened, you've got a leak, and then we can find out where that was. And so we can of course, somebody's going to call it in too, because it's probably going to be pretty visible, but then we can reroute that very quickly to reduce that outage. And then we've increased the amount of water storage we've had. We've got more interbasin connections or interconnections between other utilities. And then we have groundwater wells as an emergency backup. So on our supply side, we've tried to be diverse in different ways and not just rely on our one source.
You talked about storage, we added mixers to keep up with water quality, so we wouldn't have to waste water as much too, so. You know, water goes stagnant, you can't serve it for people, we had to dump it, so we've added mixers and gotten better with our, injection, chlorine, ammonia injection, whatnot.
Saves on chemicals too, yeah.
Exactly.
Cool, we got one tank that we have to overflow because we can't get the turnover, but we should do something like that.
And we've gotten a lot better with telemetry, keep up residuals, monochlorines, free ammonia and whatnot, keeping those things in the right level, so we don't have the water go bad on us, not to waste the water.
So what I hear you saying is if we're good citizens and we reduce our water use and behave ourselves, that our utility rates are gonna go up.
No, they
We
should
should
stay
say
about,
that
they
the
should
charge-
stay about the
right?
same,
We need to
so.
keep that hush hush. That's not gonna work.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of details to it, but basically a person's bill is going to be reflected a little bit of their tap size, how big is the pipe servicing their house, then how much water they use. And so the reality is, if somebody develops a leak on their side of the meter, in other words, they're paying for it, they're going to feel it in the very next bill. And if we haven't caught it, they'll catch it because their bill went from $100 to $150, and they're calling us up to be like, "What's up?" And then we'll meet with them and try to figure out,
I think you're dodging my original point, which was what you said earlier, is when
if done
your
right, the bill should stay the
conservation
same.
goes down, your rates are gonna go up, given state permission.
The rate per drop, but yes, your bill's going to be the same if done right.
You're using less.
You're paying $100 for 10% less
The
water.
rate, the rates are higher, but my bill should be
Correct.
accurate. Because you've got that at another point. I think it's the minimum, like for electrical company.
You have the lowest rate in the Tri-County area.
Yeah, I did start to water my grass very carefully and my grass gets a cup of water each night. Not during the day, but at night.
Of course.
Yeah.
Michael, from an energy sector, water use standpoint, any strategies that you can care to mention that Santee Cooper's already doing or has looked into?
Well, certainly, the trend away from coal-fired generation is going to reduce the amount of consumptive use that we've got. And in fact, I think in general, several of the natural gas facilities we're looking at may end up being air-cooled, which would dramatically reduce how much water we're pulling. So, that's kind of where the industry is heading. Apart from that, I mean, we've talked about what we do with the reservoirs to try and preserve those pools for recreational and power generation and water supply purposes. From a drought contingency perspective, I am certainly no expert on our generation uses, but as a rule, you're probably seeing our overall use go down, especially going into the future and the planning horizon that we're looking at. Coal-fired generation is just not going to be a long-term solution, certainly in a 50-year planning horizon. So I think you'll see it continue to trend downward from a demand side perspective.
All right. And Todd, we already heard about wetting agents and grass height. Anything else that golf industry does to?
There's a lot of monitoring, moisture sensors, we use
Okay.
all that.
For those
And
on,
then your pump system, your pump system has the meters on them and the flow gauges. If they have a big break or anything, it automatically shuts down.
you use the moisture sensors on the fairways or the greens?
Mostly
both?
greens,
Greens.
mostly greens.
All right, well, that's a good discussion. After we hear the results of the surface water modeling, we're going to revisit this and we're going to identify the strategies that we want to recommend as part of the plan. This will be documented in chapter 7 of our plan. So it's basically just going through these strategies that we've talked about and kind of agreeing upon which ones we think make sense for this basin. It's a pretty easy discussion. Usually goes pretty quick. That'll be, if not at the end of the meeting in August, it'll be first thing in September. But for our August meeting, we're going to look at the modeling scenarios. And hopefully we get the moderate and high demand projection results from the Catawba folks so that we can add them to the model and run those scenarios. You'll get the opportunity then consider whether we want to run any additional scenarios after you see the results of the current use and the moderate and the high demand scenarios. And one additional scenario you might want to consider may have to do with increased energy usage, not necessarily in this basin, but in upstream basins. There's been talk about the shuttered nuclear facility up on the Broad, VC Sumner. There's a proposal out to have another firm, private entities come in and restart that. If it got restarted, how much water would it use and would it have impacts to this basin? So, that could be a scenario that you want to look at. What if you increase demands in an upstream basin? Does that potentially cause you to go into a shortage situation? So we'll talk about additional scenarios after you see the results of the planning framework identified scenarios. That's what we have on tap for August. Sometime in August, maybe the next week after August 12th, we'll offer up model training in case anyone is interested. I don't have a date yet for that, but before the August 12th meeting, so sometime in the next 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, I may send out a calendar poll For those that are interested in learning a little bit about the model, we'll offer a kind of a 9 to 2 a.m., or excuse me, PM training session. So you can get your hands on the model. But that'll be after the August meeting. I think that's about it. Any other questions or comments before we wrap it up? Michael, do you know if we'll be back here or?
I've got to work on that.
Okay,
I'm not sure what's available. I don't think the Learning Center was available for next time,
okay,
so it probably won't be there, but
okay. This room's nice.
yeah, it worked pretty well. Summertime's a little tough.
Okay,
Part just because they've got a bunch of summer camp type stuff going too, so. So I'll let you know here shortly.
okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate all your input today. Thank you online folks for hanging with us.
I'm telling you. Better on fire.
Don't forget to grab food.